The ballroom fell silent the moment he crossed the threshold, not because anyone wanted to honor him. They were terrified. Duke Rowan Blackthorne didn't smile, didn't bow, didn't play their games. And when his eyes found hers, Clara Whitford, the deaf girl they'd spent years mocking, the entire room held its breath. What happened next shattered every rule they'd built their world on. This is the story of a woman society tried to bury, and the man who refused to look away. Stay until the end to see how they burned it all down. Like this video if you're watching from your city, and drop a comment telling us where you're from. Clara Whitford learned early that silence could be both shield and prison. At 23, she'd spent the better part of a decade navigating London's most treacherous battlefield. Not the muddy fields of Waterloo, but the glittering ballrooms where reputations were made and destroyed between the first waltz and the last glass of champagne. Tonight's venue was the Ashford Estate, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers packed with England's finest families pretending they weren't circling each other like wolves. She stood near the refreshment table, not because she was thirsty, but because it gave her somewhere to look that wasn't at the dancing couples or the clusters of young women whispering behind their fans. Her dove gray gown was expensive enough not to embarrass her family, plain enough not to draw attention. Her mother had picked it out specifically for that purpose. "Invisible," Lady Whitford had said that morning, adjusting the modest neckline. "That's what we want, invisible and unremarkable." Clara had nodded. She was good at nodding. What her mother didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Clara had stopped caring about being remarkable somewhere around her 18th birthday, right after the incident at the Pembroke Ball, when Lord Hertford had loudly asked if the deaf girl could even hear herself chew. The laughter had been vicious. Her mother had smiled through it, her father had pretended not to notice, and Clara had learned that sometimes the cruelest thing in the world is being heard perfectly well by people who don't think you can hear them. She sipped her lemonade and watched the room with the detachment of someone observing a play she'd seen too many times. Lady Pemberton was flirting with that cavalry officer again, her husband too drunk to notice. The Ashford twins were plotting something. They had that look, heads bent together, identical smirks. And there, by the windows, was Vivian Hartley, surrounded by her usual court of admirers, holding forth about something that had them all laughing. Vivian caught Clara looking and raised her glass in mock salute, her smile sharp enough to cut. Clara looked away. The thing about being deaf in a world built on conversation was that people forgot you could still see. They'd say terrible things right in front of you, assuming you were too stupid or too broken to understand context. Clara had gotten good at reading lips out of necessity, better at reading faces out of survival. She knew what they said about her. Poor thing, such a waste. Beautiful enough, but what man wants a wife who can't even hear him speak? Her brother Thomas found her just after 9, his cravat already loosened, his face flushed with wine. He was only 2 years older, but treated her like she was made of spun glass, all gentle touches and worried glances. "You don't have to stay," he said, positioning himself so she could read his lips. "I can tell Mother you had a headache." "I'm fine. Clara, I said I'm fine." She softened it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Go dance with Miss Cooper. She's been staring at you all night." Thomas glanced over, caught sight of the pretty blonde, and flushed deeper. "That's not... I should stay... Go." Clara gave him a little push. "I'll be here when you need an excuse to escape." He hesitated, guilt warring with desire on his face, then squeezed her hand and disappeared into the crowd. Clara watched him go and felt nothing. Not resentment, not sadness, just that familiar hollow space where feelings used to be. She was reaching for another glass of lemonade when the whispers started, different from the usual hum, sharper somehow, more urgent. She turned and saw heads swiveling toward the entrance, fans snapping open, conversation stopping mid-sentence. Duke Rowan Blackthorne had arrived. Clara had never seen him before. He rarely came to London, and when he did, he avoided these sorts of gatherings like they carried plague. But she knew the stories. Everyone did. The Ice Duke, they called him. The man who'd inherited his title at 19 after his father died in a riding accident, who'd turned the family's failing estates into a fortune through ruthless business sense and complete disregard for what polite society thought was proper. He owned factories, shipping companies, coal mines. He worked, which was almost as scandalous as his refusal to marry despite being 32 and ridiculously wealthy. He was also, Clara noted with the clinical detachment of someone who'd stopped thinking about such things, absolutely devastating to look at. Not handsome in the soft, pretty way that was fashionable. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair unfashionably long, his face all hard angles and sharp edges. He wore black from head to toe, not the ornate formal wear most men favored, but something simpler, almost severe. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, his jaw tight, his gray eyes scanning the room with obvious disdain. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Lord Ashford rushed forward, all nervous energy and forced joviality. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. We weren't sure you'd—" Blackthorne cut him off with a gesture, said something brief that made Ashford's smile falter. The whispers intensified. Women hid smiles behind their fans. Men straightened their postures, puffing up like roosters sensing a threat. Clara should have looked away, should have gone back to being invisible, to surviving. But there was something about the way he held himself, that absolute refusal to pretend, to perform, that held her attention. He looked as trapped as she felt, and somehow that made it worse. At least she had an excuse. What was his? Vivian Hartley didn't waste time. She glided across the floor, her rose silk gown catching the light, her practiced smile in place. Clara was too far away to read her lips, but she could imagine the conversation. Vivian was talented at making men feel like the most interesting person in the room, at least until she got what she wanted from them. Blackthorne's expression didn't change. He looked at Vivian the way someone might look at a mild annoyance, a fly buzzing near food, a rain cloud threatening a picnic. He said something short, and Vivian's smile froze. The room collectively inhaled. No one dismissed Vivian Hartley. Her father was an earl, her dowry enormous, her beauty legendary. She had 3 serious suitors and could have had 6 more with a snap of her fingers. And this man, this duke who showed up in simple black like he couldn't be bothered with fashion, had just brushed her off like lint on his coat. Vivian recovered quickly, her smile turning brittle. She said something else, her voice probably rising in pitch the way it did when she was flustered. Blackthorne turned away before she finished speaking and resumed his scan of the room. That's when his eyes found Clara. She should have looked away. Every instinct screamed at her to drop her gaze, to become invisible again. But something in his expression stopped her, a flash of recognition maybe, or curiosity. Whatever it was, it held her frozen in place as he stared at her across the crowded ballroom. The moment stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he started walking toward her. The whispers exploded into actual sound. She couldn't hear it, but she could see it. The way mouths opened and fans fluttered faster and people turned to track his progress across the floor. He moved like he owned the space, not rushed, but inevitable, and every eye in the room followed him. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't happening. He wasn't actually. He couldn't be. He stopped directly in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and when she did, she found them studying her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. But she'd spent too many years learning not to flinch, so she held her ground and waited. He spoke. She watched his lips, tried to focus through the panic singing in her veins. "May I have this dance?" The world tilted. Behind him, she could see faces contorting in shock. Vivian had gone pale except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. Lady Pemberton's mouth hung open. Even Lord Ashford looked stunned. Clara's mind raced. This was a mistake. He didn't know. Obviously didn't know who she was, what she was. In a moment, someone would tell him, and he'd make his excuses and leave, and Clara would be left standing there having somehow managed to make herself even more pathetic than usual. She should save him the embarrassment, should smile politely and decline. Instead, she heard herself say, "I don't dance." His eyebrow rose slightly. "Neither do I." "Then why?" "Because everyone in this room expects me to ask Lady Hartley or one of the other acceptable candidates." He glanced back at the crowd, his expression somewhere between amused and contemptuous. "I don't do what's expected." Clara's pulse was doing something complicated and painful. "You don't understand. I can't." "I know who you are, Miss Whitford." His gaze returned to hers, steady and unreadable. I know you're deaf. I'm asking anyway. The floor seemed to dissolve beneath her feet. He knew, and he was still standing there, hand extended, waiting. The entire ballroom was watching. She could feel their stares like weights pressing against her skin. Any second now, the laughter would start. The whispers would become shouts. Someone would say something cutting, and it would spread through London's drawing rooms by morning. Did you hear about poor Clara Whitford? The Duke asked her to dance as some sort of joke, and the pathetic thing actually thought he was serious. But when she looked at his face, there was no cruelty there. No pity either, thank God. Just that same steady, patient expression, like he had all the time in the world. Behind him, Vivian was vibrating with rage. Lady Pemberton looked positively gleeful. This would be gossip gold. Her own mother had appeared from somewhere, face pale, hand pressed to her chest like she was having an attack. Clara should say no, should protect what little dignity she had left. She took his hand. The room erupted. She couldn't hear it, but she could feel it. The collective gasp, the surge of scandalized energy. Blackthorn's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. And then he was leading her to the dance floor, and she was following because what else could she do? They reached the center, and he turned to face her, positioning her hand on his shoulder, his own settling at her waist. The contact sent electricity racing up her spine. Around them, other couples had stopped dancing to stare. I can't hear the music, she said, hating how her voice shook. I don't know the steps. Then we'll make them up. He started moving, gentle pressure at her waist guiding her backward. Just follow me. It was a disaster at first. She stumbled, stepped on his foot, felt heat flooding her face, but he didn't wince or pull away. Just adjusted, slowed down, gave her time to find the pattern in his movements. His hand at her waist was firm, directing her with tiny adjustments, pressure to indicate a turn, a slight pull to bring her closer when she started to drift. Look at me, he said when she dropped her gaze to their feet. Not the floor. She lifted her eyes to his, and something shifted. The room fell away. Not literally. She could still see the gawking faces in her peripheral vision, but suddenly it didn't matter. There was just this, the warmth of his hand, the steady gray of his eyes, the way he moved with absolute confidence even though this couldn't possibly resemble any waltz ever performed. Why are you doing this? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why not? That's not an answer. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Let's say I'm tired of predictable. I'm not entertainment. Good. I'm not looking for entertainment. They turned, his grip tightening briefly to keep her steady. I'm looking for someone real. Clara's breath caught. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know them. He tilted his head toward the watching crowd. Vipers in silk. They'll smile while they destroy you, then wonder why you're upset. You don't smile like that. How do you know? Because you're not smiling at all. You look terrified. She couldn't argue with that. Shouldn't you be dancing with someone terrified of losing your attention, not just terrified? That got an actual smile. Small, but genuine. Much better. See? Real. The music, she assumed it was still playing, must have ended because other couples were starting to move again, though they kept their distance, forming a circle around them like they were performers in a show. Blackthorn didn't seem to notice or care. He kept guiding her through their invented steps, his focus absolute. They're going to talk, Clara said. About you, about this. It'll be in every drawing room by morning. Let them talk. Easy for you to say, you're a duke, you're rich, you're... She stopped herself, but he raised an eyebrow. I'm what? Male, she finished. Men can afford scandal. Women can't. His expression darkened. You're right, and that's precisely why I'm still dancing with you instead of any of those empty-headed fortune hunters watching us. The pressure at her waist increased slightly, pulling her marginally closer. I don't care what they think, Miss Whitford. Question is, do you? Clara opened her mouth, closed it. Did she care? She'd spent so many years trying not to care, building walls around that soft, vulnerable part of her that still wanted to be accepted. But those walls had cracks now, and she could feel something dangerous leaking through. Hope, maybe, or anger. Both were terrible ideas. I don't know, she admitted. Honest. He nodded like she'd passed some test. That's a start. They made 2 more circuits of the floor before he finally stopped, though his hand lingered at her waist for a moment longer than necessary. The room was still staring. Clara could see her mother pushing through the crowd, her father close behind, both wearing identical expressions of horror. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitford. Blackthorne bowed, the gesture formal but somehow intimate. When he straightened, his eyes held hers. I hope we meet again. I don't think that's wise. Probably not. His smile was quick and devastating. I rarely do what's wise either. Then he was gone, cutting through the crowd with the same purposeful stride that had brought him to her. People scattered, trying to catch his attention, but he ignored them all. Lord Ashford called after him. Vivian moved to intercept. He brushed past both without a word and disappeared through the doors. Clara stood alone in the center of the dance floor, breathing hard, feeling like she'd survived something. Then reality crashed back in. Her mother reached her first, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. What were you thinking? The words were hissed low, but Clara could read them perfectly on her furious lips. Dancing with him in front of everyone? He asked me. So you say yes? Just like that? Clara, do you have any idea what people will... She cut herself off, glancing around at the avid faces. We're leaving. Now. Margaret. Her father appeared at her mother's elbow, looking tired. Perhaps we should... Now, Henry. They swept her toward the exit, her mother's grip iron tight. People moved aside, their whispers feeling like physical things scraping against Clara's skin. She kept her head up through sheer stubbornness, refusing to look down, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. In the carriage, her mother exploded. Clara watched her lips form words like reckless and humiliating and what will people say? Her father sat silent, looking out the window. Thomas, who'd been collected from the dance floor, kept shooting her worried glances. Clara let the words wash over her. She was thinking about steady gray eyes and the warmth of a hand at her waist, about someone who'd looked at her and seen something other than broken, about the fact that for 3 minutes she'd felt real. When they arrived home, her mother delivered a final lecture about propriety and expectations and not getting ideas above her station. Clara nodded in all the right places, said yes, and I understand, and it won't happen again. She was good at those responses after so many years, but later, alone in her room, she looked at herself in the mirror and saw something different than usual. Not invisible, not acceptable. Something that made powerful men cross ballrooms and ignore the rules. Something dangerous. She should probably be frightened, should recognize this for what it was, a moment of madness that would fade by morning, leaving nothing but consequences. Instead, she found herself smiling, and for the first time in years, it was real. Outside, London slept while gossip spread like wildfire through 1,000 drawing rooms. By dawn, every household in Mayfair would know that the Ice Duke had danced with the deaf Whitford girl, and society would be sharpening its knives. But Clara, lying awake in her bed, discovered she didn't care nearly as much as she should. She'd spent a decade learning to survive by being invisible. Maybe it was time to learn something else. The roses arrived at noon, 3 days after the ball. Clara was in the morning room, pretending to read while her mother entertained Lady Pemberton and Mrs. Ashworth, both of whom had materialized like vultures, sensing fresh meat. They'd been talking around Clara for the past 20 minutes, their voices rising and falling in that particular rhythm that meant gossip was being dissected, examined, and reassembled into something even more damaging. She couldn't hear them, but she didn't need to. Their expressions told her everything, the raised eyebrows, the pursed lips, the way they kept glancing at her like she was a curiosity in a museum. Her mother's face had that pinched look it got when she was maintaining composure through sheer force of will. Then Henderson, their butler, appeared in the doorway holding a crystal vase filled with 24 white roses. Not pink, not red. White. The kind of white that looked like fresh snow, expensive and impossibly perfect. The conversation stopped. Henderson crossed the room with careful dignity and set the vase on the table beside Clara. A small card was tucked among the blooms. Every eye in the room locked onto it like hawks spotting prey. Clara's hand shook slightly as she reached for the card. She was aware of her mother half rising from her seat, of Lady Pemberton leaning forward so far she was practically off her chair. She unfolded the note, and the words were written in a bold, slashing script that somehow matched the man perfectly. For a real conversation. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Hyde Park. The oak near the Serpentine. B. No flowery language, no poetry, just a statement of fact and an expectation that she'd comply. Clara felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest, something that felt suspiciously like excitement. Well? Her mother's lips formed the word sharply. What does it say? Clara folded the card and slipped it into her pocket. Nothing important. Clara Elizabeth Whitford, don't you dare! It's private, Mother. Lady Pemberton made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. My dear Margaret, you cannot tell me you're allowing this to continue. After the spectacle at the Ashford ball, there was no spectacle, Clara said, her voice coming out calmer than she felt. We danced, that's all. That's all? Mrs. Ashworth's eyes gleamed. The Duke of Blackthorn hasn't attended a society function in 5 years. He shows up, ignores every eligible lady in the room, including Vivian Hartley, and dances with... She caught herself, but the damage was done. With me, Clara finished flatly. You can say it. The deaf girl. The unmarriageable one. Her mother went pale. Clara, please. Why is it so impossible to believe he might want to? The words came out harder than she intended, sharp enough to cut. That maybe, just maybe, he doesn't see me the way all of you do? Because men like that don't marry girls like you, Lady Pemberton said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. I'm sorry, dear, but it's the truth. Whatever his intentions are, they're not honorable. Men of his station don't throw away their legacy on what? Clara stood, her book sliding forgotten to the floor. On someone broken? Someone inconvenient? Someone who might embarrass him at dinner parties? That's not what she meant, her mother said quickly, shooting Lady Pemberton a sharp look. Yes, it is. Clara looked at all three of them, these women who'd spent years trying to teach her how to be acceptable, how to shrink herself down into something manageable. It's exactly what she meant. She walked out before anyone could respond, the card burning like a coal in her pocket. In her room, she pulled it out and read it again. Tomorrow. Hyde Park. A public place where anyone could see them, which meant he wasn't trying to hide. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her stomach twist with something between anticipation and dread. She should refuse, should send a polite note declining, should go back to being invisible and safe. That's what a sensible person would do. Clara looked at herself in the mirror and remembered the feeling of his hand at her waist, the steadiness in his eyes when everyone else looked at her with pity or contempt. She'd stopped being sensible the moment she'd taken his hand on that dance floor. The knock on her door came an hour later. Thomas entered without waiting for permission, which meant he was worried. He sat on the edge of her bed, his face serious in that way that made him look older than 25. Mother's having an attack of the vapors downstairs, he said. Lady Pemberton thinks you're being seduced. Mrs. Ashworth thinks it's a cruel joke. Father's locked himself in his study with a bottle of port. What do you think? Thomas was quiet for a moment, studying her face. I think you look different. Different how? Awake. He shrugged. You've been sleepwalking for years, Clara, going through the motions, but right now you look like you're actually here. Her throat tightened. That scares you. Terrifies me, he admitted, because people who are awake get hurt. People who sleepwalk at least have the mercy of not feeling the blows. Maybe I'm tired of being numb. Or maybe you're about to get your heart broken by a man who'll get bored and move on, leaving you with an even worse reputation than you started with. He held up a hand when she opened her mouth. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful. Blackthorn isn't like other men. He doesn't play by the rules. Neither do I. Not anymore. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. You're going to meet him tomorrow, aren't you? Yes? Want me to come with you? Pretend we're taking a walk together? Clara felt a rush of affection for her brother, who'd always been the one person who treated her like she had a brain. No, but thank you. Then at least take Mary with you. If you show up alone, the gossip will be vicious. He was right, which annoyed her, but she nodded, and Thomas left looking like a man watching his sister walk into a burning building. That night, Clara barely slept. She kept replaying the dance in her mind, examining every moment for signs she'd misread the situation. Maybe Lady Pemberton was right. Maybe this was some kind of game she didn't understand, and she was about to make herself even more pathetic than before. But then she'd remember the way he'd looked at her. Not through her, not around her, but directly at her, and something in her chest would crack open. The next afternoon, she dressed carefully. Not her finest gown, which would look like she was trying too hard, but not her plainest either. She settled on a blue walking dress that brought out her eyes, with a Spencer jacket against the autumn chill. Mary, their lady's maid, helped with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was fashionable without being elaborate. "You look lovely, miss," Mary said, her hands deft with the pins. She was one of the few servants who'd learned to position herself so Clara could read her lips when she spoke. "I look terrified." "That too," Mary smiled. "But mostly lovely." The walk to Hyde Park took 20 minutes. Mary followed at a discreet distance, close enough to be proper, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. The park was busy with the fashionable set taking their afternoon exercise, ladies in their finery, gentlemen on horseback, children with their governesses feeding the ducks. Clara found the oak tree easily. It stood alone near the water, massive and ancient, its branches spreading like a canopy. And beneath it, hands clasped behind his back, stood Rowan Blackthorne. He was dressed more casually than he'd been at the ball. Brown coat, tan breeches, boots that looked like they'd actually been walked in. His hair was windblown, and there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested he was as nervous as she was, though his face gave nothing away. He saw her approaching and straightened. For a moment they just looked at each other, and Clara felt that same electric jolt she'd felt on the dance floor. "You came," he said. "You doubted I would?" "Everyone doubts everything about me." He gestured to a bench beneath the tree. "Shall we?" They sat, and Clara was hyper-aware of the space between them, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, far enough that they weren't touching. Mary had positioned herself by another tree about 20 yards away, carefully not watching while absolutely watching. "I'm told I'm causing a scandal," Blackthorne said, his eyes on the water. "Again." "Do you cause them often?" "Depends on your definition. I work for a living, which apparently makes me practically common. I refuse to play games with people I don't respect. I speak my mind." He glanced at her. "And now I've danced with a woman society has decided isn't worth dancing with." "They didn't decide I'm not worth it," Clara said. "They decided I'm not capable of it." "What's the difference?" "One is judgment. The other is pity." She watched a swan glide across the serpentine, graceful and sharp-edged. "I can survive judgment. Pity makes me want to set things on fire." He laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised. "I knew I liked you." "You don't know me." "Then let me." He shifted on the bench, turning to face her more fully. "That's why I asked you here. I want to know you. Not the version your family presents at parties, not the one society has decided you are. The real one." Clara's heart was doing something complicated. "Why?" "Because everyone else in that ballroom was performing, playing roles. You were the only person there who wasn't pretending to be something you're not. I was pretending to be invisible." "That's not the same thing." His eyes were steady on hers. "You were surviving. There's no shame in that." Something in Clara's chest cracked wider. She'd spent so long building walls, teaching herself not to want things she couldn't have, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not looked at. She'd been stared at plenty. But seen, the way he was seeing her now, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve instead of a problem to be managed. "You should know," she said carefully, "that there are already rumors about your intentions, about what kind of man asks a woman like me to meet him in a park. Let me guess. They think I'm either cruel or confused, or that you have some ulterior motive that involves ruining me and walking away." His jaw tightened. "And what do you think?" Clara studied his face, the sharp angles, the gray eyes that held hers without flinching, the mouth that hadn't smiled much but had laughed once, genuinely. She thought about the careful way he'd guided her through that dance, patient when she stumbled, never making her feel like a burden. I think you're telling the truth, she said finally, which is either very brave or very stupid, and I haven't decided which. Can't it be both? Usually is, in my experience. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the water. A group of ladies walked past, their heads swiveling in unison when they recognized Blackthorn. One of them said something behind her hand, and her companions laughed. Clara felt the familiar heat of shame start to rise, but then Blackthorn's hand moved slightly on the bench, his fingers brushing against hers. Just barely, light enough that it could have been an accident. It wasn't an accident. Tell me something true, he said quietly. Something you've never told anyone. Clara's breath caught. That's not a small request. I know. She shouldn't. Shouldn't expose herself like this, not to a man who could destroy her with a word, who could take whatever she gave him and use it as ammunition. But there was something in his expression, a matching vulnerability maybe, or just exhaustion with pretending, that made her want to be reckless. I used to pray, she said, the words coming out rough. When I was younger, before I understood that being deaf wasn't something that could be fixed, I'd pray every night that I'd wake up and be able to hear. I had this fantasy that it would happen suddenly. One morning, I'd open my eyes and there would be birds singing, and I'd run downstairs and my mother would be humming, and I'd finally know what music sounded like. She stopped, swallowed hard. But every morning, I'd wake up to the same silence, and eventually I realized that what I was really praying for wasn't to hear. It was to be normal, to be the daughter my parents wanted instead of the one they got stuck with. Blackthorn's hand covered hers completely now, warm and solid. You stopped praying. I stopped wanting to be someone else. She looked at him. I stopped believing anyone would ever see me as anything other than broken. You're not broken. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who... My brother was deaf, Blackthorn said, and Clara's words died in her throat. William. He was 4 years younger than me. Got sick when he was 6, scarlet fever. It destroyed his hearing completely. Clara stared at him. I didn't know you had a brother. Most people don't. He died when he was 14, riding accident. His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes weren't. The doctors said it wasn't related to his deafness, but I always wondered. If he'd heard the horse spook, if he'd been able to react faster. He stopped himself. Anyway, I watched how people treated him. Like he was stupid because he couldn't hear. Like he was less than. My parents were good about it, mostly, but even they sometimes looked at him like he was something tragic that had happened to them. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just understand that when I look at you, I'm not seeing some pitiable creature. I'm seeing someone who's surviving in a world that was built to exclude them. That takes strength most people don't have. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in Hyde Park where half of London could see her. Your brother, what was he like? Blackthorn's expression softened. Stubborn. Funny. He had this way of reading people that was almost eerie, better than most people who could hear every word. Used to drive my father crazy because William could tell when he was lying about business deals or pretending to be happy when he wasn't. He smiled, distant. He would have liked you. How do you know? Because he had very good taste in people. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, just once. And because you have that same look he used to get when he was about to do something everyone told him was impossible. Before Clara could respond, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. She turned and felt her stomach drop. Vivian Hartley was walking toward them, flanked by 2 other young women Clara recognized from various balls. Vivian's expression was pleasant enough, but there was something predatory in her eyes. Blackthorn saw Clara's face change and followed her gaze. His expression went carefully blank. Your Grace, Vivian said, stopping a few feet from their bench. Her voice was pitched to Carrie. Clara couldn't hear it, but she could see the way heads turned in their direction. What a surprise to see you here. I didn't realize you took afternoon walks. Lady Hartley. Blackthorn didn't stand, which was a subtle insult in itself. I don't, usually. Clearly, today is an exception. Vivian's eyes slid to Clara, and her smile sharpened. Miss Whitford, how unexpected to find you here as well, though I suppose coincidences do happen. It's not a coincidence, Clara said evenly. We're meeting intentionally. One of Vivian's companions, a blonde with too much rouge, made a small noise of shock. Vivian's smile didn't waver. How wonderfully direct. I suppose subtlety isn't necessary when… She paused delicately. When expectations are already so low. Clara felt ice slide down her spine. Beside her, Blackthorn had gone very still. I'm sorry. I didn't catch that, Clara said, her voice sweet as poison. Perhaps you could repeat it more clearly. Vivian's eyes flashed. I said that you must find it refreshing not to worry about propriety or reputation, given that you have so little of either to lose. The words hung in the air like a slap. Clara knew she should let it go, should smile blandly and refuse to engage the way her mother had taught her. Good girls didn't make scenes, proper ladies turned the other cheek. But Clara was so tired of being good. You're right, she said, rising from the bench. I don't have much reputation to lose, which means I'm free to say what I actually think instead of hiding behind false kindness and a pretty face. Vivian's smile froze. You want to know what I think? Clara took a step closer, keeping her voice level even though her heart was racing. I think you're terrified. Not of me. I'm not important enough to threaten you. But of the fact that someone looked past all your carefully constructed perfection and found it boring. That must be a new experience for you. How dare you? I'm not finished. Clara's hands were shaking, but she kept them steady at her sides. You've spent your whole life being the most beautiful, most accomplished, most desirable woman in every room, and none of it mattered. He still chose to talk to me. So yes, you're absolutely right. I have nothing to lose. But you do. And that terrifies you. Vivian had gone white except for 2 spots of red high on her cheeks. Her companions looked stunned. Around them, other park-goers had stopped to watch, sensing drama. You little… That's enough. Blackthorn stood, and something in his voice made even Vivian take a step back. Lady Hartley, I believe this conversation has run its course. Perhaps you should rejoin your friends. She insulted me, Vivian said, her voice climbing. You heard her. I heard you insult her first. His tone was arctic. You came over here specifically to humiliate Miss Whitford in public, and you're surprised she defended herself? I was simply stating facts. You were being cruel. He moved to stand beside Clara, his presence a solid wall at her back. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, and you know it. Now, as I said, this conversation is over. Vivian looked between them, her face contorting with something ugly. You're making a mistake, she said to Blackthorn. Throwing away your reputation for her. People are already talking. They'll tear you both apart. Let them try. His hand found Clara's, lacing their fingers together where everyone could see. I don't particularly care what people like you think. It was a declaration of war, and everyone watching knew it. Vivian's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Then she spun on her heel and stalked away, her companions scurrying after her like ducklings. Clara's legs felt weak. She'd just publicly confronted one of the most powerful women in London society. She'd thrown away any chance of redemption, of ever being accepted. By tomorrow morning, the story would be everywhere, twisted and expanded until Clara came out looking like either a victim or a villain, neither of which she wanted to be. That was stupid, she said, her voice shaking. That was magnificent. Blackthorn squeezed her hand. I've wanted to tell her off for 5 years. You don't understand. She'll destroy me. She'll make sure no one ever what? Invites you to parties where they mock you? Introduces you to men who see you as a charity case? He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Clara, you were already being destroyed. Just slowly. At least this way you went down fighting. She wanted to laugh or cry, or possibly both. My mother is going to lock me in my room. Then I'll have to break you out. This isn't funny. I know. His expression sobered. I know this is going to get worse before it gets better. But you need to understand something. I'm not backing down. Not from this, not from you. Society can say whatever it wants. Let them talk. Why? The question broke out of her. Why are you doing this? You could have anyone. You're rich, you're titled, you could marry a princess if you wanted to. Why risk everything for someone like me? Blackthorn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Because everyone else is acting, playing roles, saying what they're supposed to say, wanting what they're supposed to want. And you're the first person I've met in years who's just real. You say what you think, you don't hide. Even when it costs you, you refuse to pretend. That's not special. That's just survival. No, he shook his head. Survival is learning to play the game. What you're doing is refusing to play at all. And that, he smiled slightly. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Clara felt something break open in her chest, something dangerous and thrilling and absolutely terrifying. You're going to regret this. Probably. His thumb brushed her cheek. But I'd regret not trying more. They stood there under the oak tree, hands clasped, while all of London watched and whispered and started sharpening their knives. Clara knew this was a mistake. Knew she should pull away, apologize to Vivian, retreat back into invisibility and safety. Instead, she held on tighter. 3:00 tomorrow, Blackthorn said. Same place. You want to do this again? Every day, if you'll let me. Clara looked at him, at this man who'd appeared out of nowhere and decided she was worth the trouble, worth the scandal, worth fighting for. She thought about going back to her silent morning room, to her mother's worried looks and her father's disappointment, to a life of slow suffocation disguised as safety. Same time tomorrow, she heard herself say. Blackthorn's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and formal that it should have felt ridiculous. Instead, it felt like a promise. Until tomorrow, then. He left first, walking away with that same confident stride, leaving Clara standing under the oak tree with Mary hurrying toward her and half the park staring. She should feel ashamed. Should feel the weight of what she'd just done, how spectacularly she'd just ruined herself. Instead, she felt alive. The walk home was a blur. Mary kept shooting her worried glances but didn't speak. She'd been there for the confrontation, had seen everything. By the time they reached the house, Clara's hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a strange calm. Her mother was waiting in the front hall. In the drawing room, she said, her lips forming the words with terrifying precision. Now. Clara followed, Mary disappearing toward the servants' quarters. Her father was there too, standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed. Thomas sat in the corner, looking miserable. Sit, her mother commanded. Clara sat. Mrs. Ashworth's daughter was at Hyde Park today, her mother began, each word clipped and furious. She saw everything, the meeting, the conversation, the spectacle with Lady Hartley. Her voice cracked slightly. Clara, what were you thinking? I was thinking I'm tired of being treated like I don't exist. So you insult one of the most influential women in London? You hold hands with the Duke in public? Her mother pressed a hand to her forehead. Do you have any idea what this means? For you? For this family? It means I finally stood up for myself. It means you've ruined yourself. The words came out sharp and desperate. No one will receive you now. No one will invite us anywhere. You've made us a laughingstock. We were already a laughingstock, Mother. You just worked very hard not to notice. Her mother flinched like she'd been slapped. That's enough, her father said quietly. He moved from the fireplace to stand in Clara's line of sight. Your mother is concerned for you. We all are. I don't need concern. I need... Clara stopped herself. What did she need? Freedom? Respect? Someone to look at her like she was whole? You need to end this, her father continued. Whatever this arrangement is with Blackthorn, it ends now. Write him a letter. Tell him you were overwhelmed, that you made a mistake. Before this goes any further. No. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Clara, Thomas started. No, she repeated, looking at each of them in turn. I'm 23 years old. I've spent my entire adult life trying to be acceptable, trying to make myself small and quiet and forgettable so I wouldn't embarrass you, and I'm done. You don't know what you're saying, her mother said desperately. You think he's going to marry you? Men like that don't marry girls like you. He'll have his fun, and then he'll move on, and you'll be left with nothing. Maybe. Or maybe he's different, but either way, it's my choice to make. Her father's face had gone hard. If you continue this, there will be consequences. Like what? You'll stop inviting me to parties where people mock me? You'll be disappointed in me? Clara stood, her legs steadier than she expected. Father, you've been disappointed in me since I was 8 years old and stopped hearing. Nothing I do now can make that worse. She left before anyone could respond, taking the stairs two at a time, feeling her family's shock radiating behind her like heat. In her room, she leaned against the closed door and let herself shake. She'd just burned every bridge she had. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. The roses sat on her dresser, impossibly white, smelling like rebellion and possibility. Clara touched one petal, soft as silk, and smiled. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Same tree. Let them all watch. Let them all watch. The words echoed in Clara's mind as she stood at her window the next morning, watching rain hammer against the glass. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's face contorting with rage, felt the weight of 100 stares pressing against her skin. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something fierce and bright that refused to be extinguished. A knock rattled her door. Thomas entered without waiting, his hair disheveled, his cravat missing entirely. "You need to see this." He held out a folded newspaper, his face grim. Clara took it, her stomach already sinking. The society column took up half the page, and even from a distance she could see her name repeated like a curse. She forced herself to read. The season's most shocking scandal continues to unfold as the Duke of Blackthorn persists in his inexplicable attachment to Miss C. W., the unfortunate deaf daughter of Sir Henry Whitford. Yesterday's display in Hyde Park, where Miss W. publicly accosted Lady Vivian Hartley, has left society reeling. One must wonder what spell this young woman has cast to so thoroughly ensnare a man of Blackthorn's standing. Perhaps the Duke, known for his eccentricities, has finally taken his contempt for propriety too far. Or perhaps Miss W., denied the normal avenues of securing a husband, has resorted to more desperate measures. Either way, one can only pity Sir Henry and Lady Margaret, whose family name has been dragged through the mud by their daughter's shocking behavior. The words blurred. Clara read them again, then a third time, each pass making her feel smaller, dirtier. They'd made her sound calculating, predatory, like she was some kind of witch who'd trapped an unsuspecting duke. "There's more," Thomas said quietly. 3 other papers ran similar stories. Lady Hartley gave an interview to the Morning Post saying you attacked her unprovoked. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter. She's got half of London believing you're unhinged. He sat on the edge of her bed, looking exhausted. Father wants to send you to Aunt Catherine's in Bath. Get you out of the city until this dies down. I'm meeting Rowan at 3. Clara, you can't. It'll just make everything worse. It's already worse. Leaving now would be admitting I was wrong. You think staying and fighting will help? Thomas grabbed her hand. These people are vicious. They'll destroy you. They're already halfway there. Clara looked at the newspaper again, at the careful way they'd avoided using her full name while making absolutely sure everyone knew who they meant. She thought about her mother's face last night, the disappointment and fear warring in her expression, about her father's ultimatum, about a lifetime of Bath with Aunt Catherine, who treated her like a simpleton. I have to go, she said. Then I'm coming with you. Thomas, I'm not asking. His jaw set stubbornly. You want to burn your life down, fine. But you're not doing it alone. The rain had stopped by the time they left, replaced by low gray clouds that threatened more. Clara wore her plainest dress, a dark green that wouldn't show mud. She'd stopped caring about looking appropriate. Appropriate was for people who still had something to lose. The park was nearly empty, the weather having driven away the usual crowds. Clara was grateful for that at least. Fewer witnesses to whatever disaster was about to unfold. But as they approached the oak tree, she saw that some people had braved the damp. A cluster of young women stood about 30 yards away, their heads bent together, watching. Rowan was already there, pacing beneath the tree like a caged animal. He saw her and stopped, relief flashing across his face before settling into something harder. You saw the papers, he said. Not a question. Hard to miss. I'm going to sue them, every single one, libel, slander, whatever my solicitor can make stick. That'll just make it worse. Clara glanced at Thomas, who'd positioned himself between them and the watching women. Litigation means more stories, more attention. We'll be in the papers for months. So we're supposed to just let them print lies? We're supposed to survive. She moved closer, lowering her voice even though no one could hear them anyway. This is what they do. They take something real and twist it until it looks ugly, and then they wait for us to react. Every response just feeds them more material. Rowan's hands clenched at his sides. I won't let them destroy you. They can't destroy something that's already broken. Don't. His voice came out sharp. Don't say that. Don't give them that power. I'm being practical. You're being a coward. The words hit like a slap. Clara felt heat flood her face, anger rising sharp and sudden. Excuse me? Yesterday you stood up to Vivian Hartley in front of half of London. You told her exactly what you thought of her. Consequences be damned. That was brave. This... He gestured at her, at the careful distance she was maintaining, the way she kept glancing at the watching women. This is you retreating, letting them win. I'm trying to protect us both. By hiding? By acting like we did something wrong? He moved closer, his voice dropping. Clara, I don't care what they print. I don't care what they think. But I need you to stop caring too, because as long as you're worried about their opinions, they own you. That's easy for you to say. You're a man, a duke. You can do whatever you want and they'll call it eccentric. I do one thing they don't like, and I'm ruined. Then be ruined. His eyes were fierce. Be ruined spectacularly. Be ruined in a way that makes them afraid instead of smug. But don't you dare shrink back into that invisible corner where they've been keeping you. Clara's breath came fast and hard. Part of her wanted to hit him for making it sound so simple, for not understanding the very real consequences she was facing. But another part, the part that had held his hand yesterday, that had told Vivian Hartley exactly where to shove her false concern, that part knew he was right. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to stop apologizing for existing. I want you to walk through London with your head up and make them all confront what they've done to you. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I want you to marry me. The world tilted sideways. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misread his lips. What? Marry me. He said it again, clearer this time, the words deliberate. Not someday, not eventually, now, this week. Let them choke on it. You're insane. Probably. He caught her hands. But I'm also serious. We can get a special license. Be married by Friday. Imagine their faces when they realize all their gossip and plotting was for nothing, that you're the Duchess of Blackthorn and there's not a damn thing they can do about it. Clara felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. This is revenge. You want to marry me to spite them. I want to marry you because every conversation we've had has been more real than anything I've experienced in a decade. Because you make me laugh and you make me angry and you make me want to be better than I am. The fact that it'll also devastate people who deserve devastation is just a bonus. We've known each other less than a week. My parents knew each other 3 days before they married. They were happy for 30 years until my mother died. His grip tightened. I'm not asking you to love me, Clara. I'm asking you to trust me, to take this leap and see what happens. Behind them, Thomas made a strangled sound. The watching women had edged closer, their faces sharp with curiosity. And Clara stood there holding the hands of a duke who'd just proposed marriage like it was the most obvious thing in the world, her mind racing through implications and consequences and the absolute insanity of what he was suggesting. They'll say I trapped you, that I seduced you or manipulated you somehow. Let them say it. We'll know the truth. Your family don't have a say in this. I'm 32 years old and the head of my house. I can marry whoever I want. What about children? Heirs? I need someone who doesn't bore me to tears. Someone who challenges me and calls me on my nonsense and doesn't care about my title. He pulled her closer. I need you, Clara. Everything else we can figure out. She wanted to say yes. The word was right there, pressing against her teeth, desperate to break free. But years of caution held her back. All those lessons about knowing your place and not reaching above your station and protecting yourself from inevitable disappointment. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely. We'll regret it. Maybe. Everyone will hate us. They already do. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. At least this way we'll have each other. Clara looked at his face, at the gray eyes that saw her instead of through her, at the mouth that curved when she said something sharp, at the jaw that tightened when he was trying not to show he was nervous. She thought about going back to her father's house, to Bath and Aunt Catherine, to a life of silence and invisibility and slowly suffocating under other people's expectations. Then she thought about being the Duchess of Blackthorn, about having power instead of just surviving without it, about standing beside this man who'd appeared out of nowhere and decided she was worth fighting for. Friday, she heard herself say. You have until Friday to change your mind. His smile was incandescent. Not going to happen. Then yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her right there under the oak tree, in front of Thomas and the watching women and anyone else who cared to look. It was brief and fierce and completely improper, and Clara felt it all the way down to her bones. When they broke apart, the women were practically vibrating with shock. Thomas looked like he was going to be sick. I need to speak with your father, Rowan said. Today. Where can I find him? At his club, probably, or hiding in his study with more port. Clara's hands were shaking again, but this time from adrenaline instead of fear. He's going to say no. Then I'll convince him. Kissed her hand, formal and devastating. Go home. Pack whatever you need. By this time tomorrow, you'll be living at Blackthorn House. We're not married yet. No, but you're also not spending another night under a roof where they treat you like a burden. His expression went hard. You're my betrothed now. That makes you family, and I take care of my family. Clara wanted to argue, to point out that moving into his house before the wedding would cause even more scandal. But she was so tired of being careful, of calculating every move to minimize damage. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the only way to win this game was to stop playing it altogether. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. She smiled, feeling wild and reckless and terrified. Let's burn it all down. Thomas walked them back to the edge of the park, looking shell-shocked. You realize this is insane, right? You're talking about upending your entire lives based on a week of knowing each other. Yes, Clara said. And you're sure? Both of you? Clara looked at Rowan, who looked back at her with an expression that was equal parts determined and slightly terrified. They were both completely out of their minds. This was going to be a disaster. Yes, they said in unison. Thomas shook his head slowly. Then I guess I'm standing up with you at the wedding. Someone needs to make sure you both actually show up. Clara hugged him, sudden and fierce. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see how Mother reacts. Lady Margaret's reaction was, predictably, catastrophic. Clara arrived home to find her mother in the drawing room with Lady Pemberton and 3 other society matrons, all of whom looked up when Clara entered with identical expressions of scandalized delight. They'd clearly been discussing her, and Clara's arrival had given them the rare pleasure of watching their subject walk directly into the ambush. Clara. Her mother stood, her face pale. Where have you been? Hyde Park. With the Duke? Yes. The matrons exchanged glances. Lady Pemberton's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. My dear girl, surely you understand how this looks. Meeting him alone repeatedly. I wasn't alone, Thomas was with me. Clara looked at her mother. And we're engaged. The Duke proposed, and I accepted. The silence was total and absolute. Then her mother laughed, a high, brittle sound that made Clara's skin crawl. No, you're not. You're confused. He was being kind, perhaps, or he proposed marriage. I said yes. We're getting a special license and marrying on Friday. This is insane, Lady Pemberton said, her voice sharp. Margaret, your daughter has clearly been taken in by some sort of game. The Duke cannot possibly intend to— Speaking to my father right now, Clara interrupted, asking for permission. Her mother swayed slightly. One of the other matrons, Mrs. Fairchild, Clara thought, made a small sound of distress. Lady Pemberton's face had gone through several colors before settling on an alarming shade of red. This is impossible, she said flatly. Blackthorn doesn't marry. He's refused every eligible woman in London for over a decade. The idea that he would choose you— She cut herself off, but the damage was done. The idea that he would choose someone like me, Clara finished. Broken, inconvenient, a burden instead of an asset. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's what you're all thinking. Clara looked at each of them, these women who'd spent years pitying her while simultaneously ensuring she knew her place. But he did choose me, and in 3 days I'll be a duchess. So perhaps you should all start considering how you want to handle that. Margaret, you cannot allow this, Mrs. Fairchild said urgently. Think of the scandal. Think of your family's reputation. My reputation is already destroyed, remember? You've all made sure of that. Clara's voice was steady, cold. Every whisper, every pitying look, every time you spoke over me or around me or about me like I wasn't standing right there. You buried me while I was still breathing, and now you're upset that I'm climbing out of the grave? Her mother reached for her. Clara, please, you're not thinking clearly. This is too fast, too what? Too good to be true? Clara stepped back. Or too good for me? That's not fair. None of this is fair, Mother, but it's happening anyway. The front door slammed. Male voices echoed in the hall, her father's raised in anger, and another calmer voice that made Clara's heart lurch. The drawing room door opened. Sir Henry stood there, his face purple with rage, and behind him, perfectly composed, was Rowan. You, Sir Henry pointed at Clara, his hand shaking. You will go to your room, now. And you, he turned on Rowan, will leave my house immediately. With respect, sir, I will not. Rowan's voice was polite but inflexible. Not until I've received an answer to my proposal. The answer is no, absolutely not. I will not allow my daughter to be part of whatever game you're playing. It's not a game. Then you're deluded. You think I don't know what this is? You're bored, looking for entertainment, and my daughter, my vulnerable, impressionable daughter, is convenient. Your vulnerable daughter, Rowan said quietly, has more courage than anyone in this room, including you. Sir Henry's face went from purple to nearly black. How dare you? She's been invisible to you for years. You've let society treat her like something to be pitied and managed, and you've never once stood up for her. So forgive me if I don't take your sudden concern seriously. She's my daughter. Then act like her father. Rowan's voice cut like a blade. Stop treating her like a problem to be solved and start seeing her as a person who deserves respect and autonomy. She's 23 years old. She can make her own choices. Not this choice. Not with you. Why not? Clara's voice rang out across the room. Everyone turned to look at her. Tell me why not, Father. Is it because he's unsuitable? Because his title isn't good enough? Or is it because you can't believe anyone would actually want me? Clara. Her mother's face crumpled. No, I want to hear him say it. Clara moved to stand beside Rowan. I want to hear you explain why I'm good enough to parade at balls where people mock me, but not good enough to marry a duke who actually sees me as something other than broken. You don't understand what you're asking for, her father said, and for the first time his voice carried something other than anger, exhaustion maybe, or fear. Marriage isn't a fairy tale. It's work and compromise and years of navigating expectations. And you... He stopped, swallowed hard. You're not equipped for this. The words landed like stones. Because I'm deaf, Clara said flatly. Because you've been sheltered, protected. You don't know how cruel the world can be. Protected? Clara's laugh was sharp and bitter. Is that what you call it? Watching while people treat me like furniture? Listening to you apologize for my existence? Pretending not to notice when you look at me like I'm your greatest disappointment? That's not true. It is. Clara felt tears burning, but refused to let them fall. You've been disappointed in me since I was 8 years old and stopped being the daughter you wanted. And I've spent 15 years trying to make up for it, trying to be acceptable enough that maybe you'd look at me without that expression on your face. But I'm done. I'm done trying to earn something you're never going to give me. Her father looked stricken. Around the room, the matrons watched with avid eyes, already composing the stories they'd tell at tomorrow's tea. Clara, her mother said softly, you're upset. You're not thinking. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years. Clara turned to Rowan. I want to leave. Now. You're not going anywhere, her father said. I'm 23. You can't keep me here. You're still under my care. Then release me from it. Clara's voice was steel. Give your consent to the marriage or don't. But either way, I'm leaving this house today, and I'm not coming back." The silence stretched like a wire pulled tight. Clara could feel her pulse hammering, could see the shock on her mother's face, the fury on her father's. The matrons looked ready to spontaneously combust from the scandal of it all. Then Thomas appeared in the doorway. "I'll stand witness," he said quietly, "for the marriage. If you won't give consent, Father, I will, as Clara's nearest male relative." "You wouldn't dare," Sir Henry said. "I would. I will." Thomas moved to stand beside Clara. "She's my sister, and she deserves to be happy. If you can't see that, if you're so worried about what people will think that you'd rather keep her locked away forever, then you don't deserve to call yourself her father." Lady Margaret made a sound like something breaking. Sir Henry stood frozen, his face working through emotions Clara couldn't name. The matrons had gone completely silent, their scandal radar overwhelmed. "Fine," Sir Henry said finally, the word coming out broken. "Fine. Marry him. Leave. But don't come crying to me when he tires of his charitable project and leaves you with nothing but a tarnished title and broken promises." It should have hurt more than it did. Maybe Clara had spent so long expecting the worst from him that the actual words couldn't penetrate anymore. Or maybe she'd finally gone numb to his disappointment. "I'll take that as consent," Rowan said coldly. "The marriage contracts will be sent over tomorrow. You can sign them or not. Makes no difference legally, but I assumed you'd want some say in the settlements. Get out of my house." "Gladly," Rowan offered Clara his arm. "Shall we?" Clara took it, her hand trembling only slightly. She looked at her mother, who'd sunk into a chair and was crying silently, at her father, whose face had hardened into something unreachable, at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "Goodbye," she said. Nobody answered. She walked out of the drawing room, down the hall, and through the front door into gray afternoon light. Behind them, she could hear her mother's sobs, her father's voice raised in anger, the murmur of the matrons picking over the ruins of the Whitford family reputation. Clara kept walking. A carriage waited at the curb, Rowan's, black with silver trim, finer than anything her family owned. He handed her in, climbed in after her, and rapped on the ceiling. The carriage lurched forward. Only then did Clara allow herself to feel it, the enormity of what she'd just done. She'd walked away from her family, her home, everything she'd known. She'd burned every bridge and salted the earth behind her. There was no going back from this. "Are you all right?" Rowan asked quietly. Clara looked at him. This man who'd upended her entire world in less than a week, who'd proposed marriage like it was inevitable, who'd stood in her father's house and defended her when her own family wouldn't. "No," she said honestly. "I don't think I am." "That's fair." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "For what it's worth, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "Or the stupidest." "Often the same thing." Clara felt a laugh bubble up, half hysterical. "We're completely insane." "Yes." "This is going to be a disaster." "Probably. In 3 days I'm going to be a duchess, and I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither do I." He squeezed her hand. "But we'll figure it out together." The carriage rolled through London streets, heading north toward Mayfair and Blackthorn House. Clara watched the city pass, felt the weight of her old life falling away like a shed skin. Everything she'd been, everything she'd carefully constructed to survive, gone. Ahead was something new and terrifying and completely unknown. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt free. Blackthorn House was massive, white stone and columns, windows glittering in the fading light. Servants appeared to take her things, though Clara had brought almost nothing, just the dress on her back and a fierce determination not to look scared. Inside was all marble and dark wood, paintings of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. A housekeeper appeared, Mrs. Davies, middle-aged and capable-looking, and Rowan introduced Clara as his betrothed. If Mrs. Davies was shocked, she hid it perfectly. "I've prepared the blue suite for Miss Whitford," she said, her lips clear and easy to read. "Unless your grace would prefer different arrangements." "The blue suite is perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Davies." The housekeeper led Clara upstairs, chattering pleasantly about meals and schedules and how wonderful it was to have a lady in the house again. Clara nodded and smiled and understood about half of it, her mind still spinning. The blue suite was enormous. Bedroom, sitting room, dressing room, all done in shades of cream and gold with blue accents. A fire already crackled in the hearth. Through the windows, Clara could see London spreading out like a carpet of lights beginning to glow in the dusk. "I'll send up Mary to help you dress for dinner," Mrs. Davies said. "His Grace keeps country hours, dinner at 7. Not fashionably late, but he does like things punctual." "Mary? Your lady's maid. She came with you from Sir Henry's house, arrived about an hour ago with your trunks." Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. Thomas. It had to be Thomas, sending Mary ahead, making sure Clara had at least one familiar face. She made a mental note to hug him the next time she saw him. After Mrs. Davies left, Clara sank onto the bed and let herself breathe. The mattress was softer than her bed at home. The whole room smelled of beeswax and roses. Everything was beautiful and strange and completely overwhelming. A knock. Mary entered, her face anxious. "Miss Clara, are you all right?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "Ask me again in 3 days." Mary smiled and began unpacking the trunks that had somehow materialized in the dressing room. Clara watched her work, feeling unmoored. This morning she'd woken up in her childhood bedroom. Tonight she was sleeping in a duke's house. By Friday she'd be married. The world had tilted completely off its axis. Dinner was intimate, just her and Rowan in a dining room that could have seated 40. They sat at one end of the long table, close enough to speak without shouting. The food was excellent, though Clara barely tasted it. "You're quiet," Rowan observed. "I'm processing." "Fair enough." He poured her more wine. "The contracts arrived this afternoon. Your father signed them." Clara looked up sharply. "He did?" "Under duress, I imagine." Thomas witnessed. He paused. "Your dowry is embarrassingly small, by the way. Your father's tied up most of your funds in some sort of trust that won't be released until you're 30 or married with his blessing." "Which he's not giving." "No. So I told my solicitor to return the dowry entirely. You'll come to this marriage with your own money, not his." Clara set down her fork. "You're giving me my dowry back?" "It's yours. You should control it." He met her eyes. "I don't need your money, Clara. I need you to know you're not trapped. That if this doesn't work, if I turn out to be as terrible as your father thinks, you have the means to leave." Something in Clara's chest cracked open. "You're setting me up to leave you?" "I'm setting you up to have choices. There's a difference." She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process a man who'd proposed marriage and immediately started planning for its potential failure. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked quietly. Rowan's smile was small and genuine. "Then I'll count myself the luckiest man in England." They finished dinner in comfortable silence. Afterward, Rowan walked her back to her suite, stopping outside the door. "Tomorrow the license will be ready," he said. "We can marry at St. George's or here in the house chapel. Your choice." "Here," Clara said immediately. "I don't need an audience." "Here it is, then." He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her forehead, gentle and brief. "Sleep well, Clara. The hard part is over." She wanted to believe him, but as she closed the door and leaned against it, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hard part was just beginning. The next 2 days passed in a blur. Solicitors arrived with papers to sign. A seamstress came to alter a cream-colored silk gown that Rowan's mother had worn at her own wedding. Clara stood still while pins were adjusted and hems marked, feeling like she was preparing for her own execution. No one came from her family, no notes, no visits, no acknowledgement that the wedding was happening. Clara told herself she didn't care, but the silence ached like a wound. Thomas showed up Thursday evening, looking exhausted. "Mother's taken to her bed," he said without preamble. "Father's drinking. The entire house feels like someone died." "How dramatic." Clara tried for light, but landed somewhere closer to bitter. "It's not a joke, Clara. Father's talking about cutting you off completely. No inheritance, no contact, nothing." "He already did that. The trust, remember?" "That was different. This is—" Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "This is permanent. He means it." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known her father was angry, but this was erasure. This was being written out of the family history like she'd never existed. "Let him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Clara." "Let him." I don't need his money or his approval. I've never had either one. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into a hug. You're braver than all of us, he said quietly. I hope he's worth it. So do I. Friday dawned cold and bright. Clara woke to Mary pulling back curtains, sunlight spilling across the carpet like liquid gold. Your wedding day, miss, Mary said, her smile nervous and excited. How are you feeling? Terrified. That's normal, I think. Clara let Mary dress her in the silk gown, let her pin her hair up with pearl combs that had belonged to Rowan's mother. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked elegant, composed, sure of herself. Clara wanted to climb out the window. At noon, she walked down the hall to the house chapel, a small room with stained glass windows and dark wood pews. Rowan waited at the altar with the vicar, dressed in black and silver. Thomas stood beside him as witness. Mrs. Davies and 3 other servants made up the rest of the congregation. This was it. No going back now. Clara walked down the short aisle, her hands clasped to keep them from shaking. Rowan's eyes never left her face. The ceremony was brief. Clara barely heard the words, too focused on not passing out. She said, I will, when prompted, heard Rowan's voice saying the same. The vicar spoke, blessed them, pronounced them married. Rowan kissed her, careful and restrained, nothing like the fierce kiss under the oak tree. And just like that, Clara Whitford ceased to exist. In her place stood Clara Blackthorne, Duchess. The household staff congratulated them. Thomas hugged her tight and whispered, You did it. You actually did it. Mrs. Davies produced champagne that tasted like expensive bubbles and regret. Clara drank it and smiled and felt nothing. That evening, a letter arrived. Clara saw the seal, her father's crest, and her stomach dropped. She broke it open with shaking hands. Clara, by the time you read this, you will be married and beyond my reach. I write not to congratulate you, but to make one final thing clear. You are no longer my daughter. Your name will be removed from family records. Your inheritance is forfeit. Your mother and I will not acknowledge you in public or private. You have chosen your path, and you will walk it without us. I pray you do not come to regret your choice as bitterly as I regret mine, in allowing you to be born thinking you deserved more than the hand you were dealt. Sir Henry Whitford. The letter slipped from Clara's fingers. She stood in her new bedroom, the Duchess's chambers now, connected to Rowan's by a shared sitting room, and felt the full weight of what she'd done crash down on her. She'd gambled everything, her family, her name, her entire past. All for a man she'd known for barely a week, based on nothing but hope and desperation and the fierce belief that anything was better than the life she'd been living. And now she was the Duchess of Blackthorne, and her father had just disowned her, and tomorrow all of London would know she'd been cut off completely. The door opened. Rowan entered, saw her face, saw the letter on the floor. What happened? Clara tried to speak, but no words came out. She felt like she was drowning, like the walls were closing in, like she'd made the most catastrophic mistake of her life, and there was no way to fix it. Rowan picked up the letter, read it, and his face went hard as stone. He can't do this, he said. He just did. Then we'll fight him, legally, publicly. No. Clara's voice came out broken. No more fighting. I'm tired, Rowan. I'm so tired. He moved toward her, but she stepped back, holding up a hand. I need to be alone for a while, just for tonight. Please. She saw him hesitate, saw the concern and frustration warring on his face, but he nodded. If you need me, I'm right through that door, he said, gesturing to the connecting sitting room. Then he left, and Clara was alone in her beautiful prison of a bedroom, wearing a wedding dress that cost more than her dowry, carrying a title she'd never wanted, married to a man who'd promised her freedom and instead given her a new kind of cage. She sank to the floor, the silk pooling around her, and finally let herself cry. Outside, London hummed with gossip about the fallen Whitford daughter who'd somehow seduced a duke. Inside Blackthorne House, the new Duchess wept on her wedding night, holding a letter that told her exactly what her defiance had cost. Everything. She'd bet everything, and now she'd find out if she'd won or simply traded one prison for another. The answer, she suspected, would come soon enough. Clara woke on the floor, still wearing the wedding dress, her face swollen from crying. Gray dawn light filtered through the windows. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, why her chest ached like something had been carved out of it. Then memory crashed back. The wedding, the letter, her father's final rejection. She was the Duchess of Blackthorn now, and she was completely alone. A soft knock on the connecting door made her flinch. She didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. Rowan stood there in shirt sleeves and wrinkled trousers, his hair a mess, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he'd slept about as well as she had. "You're on the floor," he said, very observant. He crossed the room, crouched beside her. "How long have you been here?" "All night, I think." Clara's voice came out rough. "I fell asleep at some point." Rowan didn't say anything, just held out his hand. Clara stared at it for a moment, then let him pull her up. Her legs were stiff, the dress hopelessly wrinkled. She looked like exactly what she was. A girl who'd made a catastrophic mistake and was only now realizing the full extent of it. "I should call Mary," she said. "Get out of this dress." "Clara, I'm fine." "You're not." His hand settled on her shoulders, gentle but firm. "You spent your wedding night crying on the floor. That's not fine." "What do you want me to say? That I'm having regrets? That I'm wondering if this was all a terrible mistake?" She pulled away from him. "Because I am. I traded my entire family for what exactly? A title? A man I barely know? The satisfaction of proving I could be defiant. For freedom," Rowan said quietly. "You traded a cage for the possibility of something real." "This doesn't feel real. It feels like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "Then make it yours." He moved to stand in her line of sight, making sure she could see his face. "You're the Duchess of Blackthorn now. That comes with power, money, influence. Use it." "To do what?" "Whatever you want. Start a salon, fund charities. Tell society to go to hell and mean it." His eyes were intense. "Your father tried to erase you, prove him wrong. Show everyone that you're not just surviving. You're thriving." Clara wanted to believe him, but the weight of her father's letter pressed against her ribs like a stone. "Your mother and I will not acknowledge you." She'd known he was angry, but seeing it written out, that cold, final rejection, made it real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "I don't know how to be a duchess," she admitted. "Neither did my mother when she married my father. She was a vicar's daughter with no training, no connections. The society matrons ate her alive for the first year." He smiled slightly. "Then she stopped trying to please them and started being herself. By the time she died, half of London was terrified of her, and the other half wanted to be her." "What if I don't have that in me?" "You faced down Vivian Hartley in Hyde Park. You told your father exactly what you thought of him. You walked out of your family home and didn't look back." He caught her hand. "Clara, you have more fight in you than anyone I've ever met. You just need to remember it." She looked at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like a storm and changed everything. He looked tired and worried and absolutely certain of what he was saying. Maybe that certainty was enough for both of them right now. "All right," she said. "What do we do first?" His smile was fierce. "We go to the opera." Clara thought she'd misheard. The opera. "Tonight. Opening night of the season. Everyone who matters will be there." He squeezed her hand. "Including everyone who's been gossiping about us for the past week. We show up together, we take my family's box, and we make them all confront the fact that you're not going anywhere." "That's insane." "That's strategy." He pulled her closer. "They're expecting you to hide, to be ashamed. Every day you stay invisible, you prove them right, that you're something shameful, something that needed to be hidden away. But if you show up with your head high, wearing the Blackthorn diamonds, sitting in one of the best boxes in the house, what can they say?" Claire's mind raced through implications. The opera was neutral ground, public enough that people couldn't cut her directly without causing a scene. And the Blackthorn box was prestigious, third tier, center, with a perfect view of both the stage and the other boxes. If they sat there together, they'd be making a statement that couldn't be ignored. But it would also be brutal. Every eye in the house would be on them, every whispered comment, every cruel observation. Clara would have to sit there for 3 hours, exposed and vulnerable, while society dissected her from every angle. "I'll be with you the entire time," Rowan said, reading her hesitation. And Thomas said he'd come if you wanted. Moral support. Thomas can't sit in our box. That would be unconventional? Scandalous? He grinned. Clara, we're already the scandal of the season. Might as well lean into it. She should say no, should insist they wait, let things settle, approach this gradually. That's what a sensible person would do. But sense had gotten her nowhere. Maybe it was time to try reckless instead. All right, she said. The opera, tonight. Rowan's expression blazed with approval. That's my Duchess. The word sent warmth through her chest. My Duchess. Like she belonged to him, like he was claiming her publicly and without shame. Maybe that's what she needed, not to be invisible, but to be claimed. To have someone stand beside her and say, yes, this is my wife, and I don't care what you think about it. Mary helped her dress in a deep blue gown that Clara had never worn. Too fine for the kind of parties she'd been relegated to before, but perfect for tonight. The blackthorn diamonds came out of the vault, 3 generations old, heavy and cold against Clara's collarbone. Mary styled her hair high, leaving a few curls loose around her face. When Clara looked in the mirror, she saw someone unfamiliar staring back. Not invisible, not broken, just different. Someone who might actually deserve to be called a duchess. Rowan was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in black evening clothes that made him look dangerous and devastating. He looked up as Clara descended, and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. You look like you're going to war, he said. I am. Good. He offered his arm. Let's go conquer. The opera house glittered like a jewel box. Clara and Rowan arrived fashionably late. Rowan's strategy, letting everyone else settle in first so their entrance would be noticed. They walked through the lobby, heads turning to track their progress. Clara kept her chin up, her hand steady on Rowan's arm, even though she could feel her pulse hammering in her throat. Thomas met them outside the blackthorn box, looking nervous in formal wear that was slightly too tight. Mother is here, he said quietly, positioning himself so Clara could read his lips. Father, too. Their box is directly across from yours. Clara's stomach clenched. You didn't mention that. I didn't know until I arrived. Apparently Father decided at the last minute to attend, making a statement, I think. Then we'll make a bigger one. Rowan's jaw was set. Come on. They entered the box just as the house lights dimmed for the overture. Every head in the vicinity swiveled. Clara could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, could see mouths moving in rapid conversation. And there, across the horseshoe curve of boxes, sat her parents. Her mother looked gray and small, her face drawn. Her father sat rigid beside her, his expression carved from stone. He looked directly at Clara, met her eyes for one long, terrible moment, then deliberately turned away. The rejection was physical, like a slap. Clara's breath caught. Beside her, she felt Rowan tense. Look at me, he said quietly. Not them. Me. She turned, found his gray eyes steady and fierce. You are the Duchess of Blackthorn, he said, each word deliberate. You sit in one of the best boxes in this house. You wear diamonds that are worth more than most of these people's estates. And you are my wife. Nothing they do or say can change that. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The orchestra began to play. She couldn't hear it, but she could feel it vibrating through the seat, through her bones. The curtain rose on a stage full of elaborate sets and costumed performers. For the first act, Clara barely watched the opera. She was too aware of the eyes on them, of the heads turning periodically to stare. During the first intermission, people began visiting other boxes, a tradition, Rowan explained, of social calling compressed into 15-minute increments. No one came to theirs. They sat alone while traffic flowed around them like water around rocks. Clara watched people visit her parents' box, Lady Pemberton, the Ashfords, a dozen others. Saw her mother's face grow increasingly strained, her father's increasingly smug. They were being acknowledged, supported, embraced. Meanwhile, the Blackthorn box remained empty. This was a mistake, Clara said quietly. Give it time. No one's coming, Rowan. We're being cut, both of us. Then we'll create our own circle. He stood, offered his hand. Come, let's walk. They stepped out into the corridor, Thomas following. People scattered as they approached, conversations dying mid-sentence. Clara felt like she was walking through a minefield, each step potentially explosive. No one met her eyes. No one acknowledged them. Then a voice called out, "Your Grace!" They turned. A tall, elegant woman in burgundy silk was approaching, her face lit with genuine warmth. Clara didn't recognize her, but Rowan did. His expression shifted to surprise and pleasure. "Lady Catherine," he said, "I didn't know you were in London. Just arrived yesterday. Had to see what all the fuss was about." The woman, Lady Catherine, turned to Clara, her smile widening. "And you must be the new Duchess, the one everyone's pretending doesn't exist." Clara blinked, caught off guard by the directness. Yes, Clara Blackthorne. Catherine Ashworth, Dowager Countess of Wessex." She linked her arm through Clara's with easy confidence. "Walk with me, dear. We have things to discuss." Before Clara could respond, Lady Catherine was steering her down the corridor, away from Rowan and Thomas. Clara glanced back, panicked, but Rowan nodded encouragingly. "Don't look so terrified," Lady Catherine said, her voice carrying that particular clarity that made lip-reading easy. "I'm not going to eat you, though I am going to give you some advice, whether you want it or not." "All right. First thing you need to know about London society, they're all cowards." Lady Catherine's eyes swept the crowd with obvious contempt. "They operate on consensus. If everyone agrees someone is beneath notice, then beneath notice they stay. But if someone breaks ranks, someone with enough power that they can't be easily dismissed, the whole structure wobbles." "I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting you need allies, people who are too important to be cut, who are willing to publicly acknowledge you." She stopped walking, turned to face Clara directly. "I'm offering to be one of them." Clara stared at her. "Why?" "Because I liked Rowan's mother. She was the only person in London who had the spine to tell me I was being an idiot when I needed to hear it." Lady Catherine's smile turned sad. "And because I know what it's like to be ostracized. I was married at 16 to a man 40 years my senior. When he died and left me everything, his family tried to have me declared incompetent. Said I'd seduced him, manipulated him. It took me 5 years to claw back my reputation. I didn't know. No one does. That's the point." She squeezed Clara's arm. "What I learned is that you can't wait for society to accept you. You have to make yourself indispensable. Throw parties they can't afford to miss. Support causes they care about. Make yourself so useful that excluding you costs them more than including you." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but possibility. "That sounds exhausting." "It is. But it works." Lady Catherine glanced around, then leaned closer. "There's a charity meeting next week, hospital funding for wounded soldiers. The Queen is patron. Half the ton will attend. If you show up with me, if you're seen actively participating, it'll be harder for them to ignore you." "Why would you risk your reputation for me?" Lady Catherine's expression turned fierce. "Because I'm 73 years old, and I stopped caring what these vultures think of me decades ago. And because watching you walk into this opera house tonight, knowing what's being said about you, knowing your own family is here, and refusing to acknowledge you, and doing it anyway?" She smiled. "That took courage. I respect courage." The bell rang, signaling the end of intermission. Lady Catherine released Clara's arm. "Think about what I said. Send word if you're interested." She started to walk away, then turned back. "And Clara? Stop looking like you're waiting for permission to exist. You're a duchess. Act like one." Clara stood frozen as Lady Catherine disappeared into the crowd. Around her, people were filing back to their boxes, but she couldn't move. Someone had seen her. Not just looked at her, but seen her, seen what she was trying to do, what it cost. She found Rowan and Thomas waiting where she'd left them. Rowan's face was anxious. "What did she say?" Clara told him. As she spoke, she watched his expression shift from concern to calculation to something that looked like triumph. "Lady Catherine Ashworth," he said slowly. "Of course. She's untouchable, wealthy, connected, and completely uninterested in playing nice." He grabbed Clara's hands. "If she's willing to sponsor you, to be seen publicly supporting you, Clara, this changes everything." "Does it?" "Yes." His grip tightened. "You need to say yes. Go to that charity meeting. Let her introduce you around. Start building your own network. But no buts. This is your opening. Take it. They returned to the box for the second act. Clara tried to focus on the stage, but her mind was racing. A week ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was notorious, and apparently she had options. The second intermission was different. A few people approached the box, not many, but enough. A young couple Clara didn't know, curious and friendly. An older gentleman who'd known Rowan's father. And halfway through, Thomas nudged her and pointed across the way. Vivian Hartley had arrived, flanked by her parents and looking irritated. She scanned the boxes, her gaze landing on Clara. For a moment their eyes met. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to look away first. Vivian's mouth tightened. Then she deliberately turned her back. Clara felt the snub like a physical blow. But before she could react, Rowan's hand covered hers. "Don't give her the satisfaction," he murmured. "Let her stew." The final act was endless. By the time the curtain fell, Clara was exhausted. From holding herself rigid, from being stared at, from the constant awareness that she was being judged with every breath. When they finally left the opera house, she felt like she'd survived a battle. The carriage ride home was quiet. Thomas had his own transport, so it was just Clara and Rowan. He looked pleased, energized even, while Clara felt like she'd been wrung out and left to dry. "That went well," he said. "Did it?" "Lady Catherine acknowledged you. Several others followed her lead. By tomorrow word will spread that the Dowager Countess of Wessex has taken you under her wing." He smiled. "That's significant." "My parents wouldn't look at me." The smile faded. "I know." "My father turned away like I was nothing, like I'd ceased to exist." Clara's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I knew he'd written me off, but seeing it, having him look right through me, then he's a fool." Rowan moved across the carriage, sitting beside her instead of across from her. "A blind, stubborn fool who doesn't deserve you." "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No, but it does make it his loss, not yours." He pulled her against his side, let her lean into his warmth. "You were magnificent tonight. Walking in there, knowing what you were facing, and doing it anyway. That's the woman I married." Clara closed her eyes, let herself take comfort from his presence. The carriage rolled through dark streets, taking them home to Blackthorn House. Home. It was strange to think of it that way, but maybe she needed to start. This was her life now. This house, this man, this title. She couldn't keep waiting for her old life to take her back. Over the next week, Clara threw herself into learning how to be a duchess. Mrs. Davies walked her through household management, budgets and menus and staff schedules. Rowan's solicitor explained her new financial position, the accounts and properties she now had access to. A social secretary was hired to manage correspondence and invitations. The invitations were sparse at first. A few curiosity seekers, people who wanted to see the scandal up close. Clara declined most of them, following Lady Catherine's advice to be strategic. Better to be selective than desperate. The charity meeting was held at the Pemberton estate, of all places. Clara arrived with Lady Catherine, who swept in like she owned the place and immediately began introducing Clara around. Lady Pemberton looked ready to faint when she realized she'd have to acknowledge Clara in her own home. But social rules were social rules. You didn't snub a guest of Lady Catherine's without consequences. The meeting itself was tedious, lots of discussion about fundraising and hospital wings and proper allocation of resources. But Clara listened carefully, watched how the other women interacted, learned the power dynamics. Lady Vivian was there, seated near the front, glaring daggers. Her mother, Lady Hartley, was one of the organizers, which explained the hostility. When they broke for tea, Lady Hartley approached. "Lady Catherine, what a pleasure. And your grace." The title came out strained. "We weren't expecting you." "Clara expressed interest in supporting our veterans," Lady Catherine said smoothly. "Given that Blackthorn Holdings includes several factories that supply the military, it seemed appropriate for the Duchess to be involved in their welfare." It was a masterful deflection, positioning Clara's presence as practical rather than social, impossible to criticize without looking callous about wounded soldiers. Lady Hartley's smile became fixed. "Of course. How generous." Vivian appeared at her mother's elbow. "Your Grace," she said, the words dripping with false sweetness. I heard your family wasn't able to attend the opera last week. I hope there's no illness. My family attended, Clara said evenly. We just happened to be seated in different boxes. Oh, Vivian's eyes gleamed. I thought perhaps they were indisposed or unwilling to be seen with. She caught herself, but the implication hung in the air. With me, Clara finished. You can say it, Lady Vivian. We all know my father has cut me off. It's not exactly a secret. The nearby conversation stuttered to a halt. Everyone was listening now. I simply meant, you meant to embarrass me, to remind everyone that I'm not accepted, not legitimate, not worthy of this title. Clara kept her voice level, conversational even. But here's what you don't understand. I don't need my father's approval anymore. I don't need yours either. I have a position, resources, and a husband who actually chose me. What exactly do you have besides your parents' money and a desperate need to feel superior? Vivian's face went white, then red. How dare you? That's quite enough, Vivian. Lady Catherine's voice cut like a whip. The Duchess makes a fair point. Perhaps you should focus on securing your own future instead of obsessing over hers. Several women made strangled noises. Half shock, half suppressed laughter. Vivian looked around wildly, seeking support, but found only averted eyes. Even her mother had backed away slightly, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. I think we've had enough charity work for one day, Vivian said, her voice shaking with rage. She grabbed her reticule and stormed out, her mother hurrying after her. Silence fell. Then Lady Catherine laughed, a rich, delighted sound. Well, she said, I think that went rather well. The other women exchanged glances. Then, slowly, one of them smiled. Then another. Within moments, the tension had broken and conversations resumed, this time with Clara included rather than excluded. She'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but enough for now. The ride home, Lady Catherine patted her hand. You're learning. A few more performances like that, and they'll be terrified to cross you. I didn't mean to lose my temper. Yes, you did, and it was perfect. Lady Catherine's eyes twinkled. Fear and respect are close cousins, dear. Sometimes you need both. At home, Clara found Rowan in his study, surrounded by paperwork. He looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from distracted to alert. How did it go? I told Vivian Hartley she was pathetic and desperate. He blinked. You what? Clara explained, watching his face cycle through surprise and concern before landing on something that looked like pride. You're either the bravest woman I know or the most reckless, he said. Can it be both? He laughed and pulled her into his lap, paperwork forgotten. How do you feel? Terrified, exhilarated, like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling. Flying, he said firmly. Definitely flying. They sat like that for a while, Clara's head tucked under his chin, his arms solid around her. It felt easy in a way nothing else had since their wedding. Not performance, not strategy, just two people learning to be comfortable with each other. I got a letter today, Rowan said quietly, from my aunt, my father's sister. Clara lifted her head. And? She wants to meet you, says she's heard all the gossip and wants to form her own opinion. He smiled slightly. She's formidable. Makes Lady Catherine look gentle. That's terrifying. She'll love you. His hand came up to cup her face. You're everything our family needed. Someone with spine who won't put up with nonsense. Clara wanted to believe him. Some days it was easier than others. Today, fresh from her victory over Vivian, it almost felt possible. The invitations started coming more frequently after that. Not from everyone. The truly conservative families still cut them cold. But slowly, gradually, a circle formed. Lady Catherine's friends mostly, older women who'd survived their own scandals and respected someone fighting back. A few younger couples who were more progressive, less concerned with tradition. Business associates of Rowan's who cared more about his money than his wife's hearing. It wasn't London society, but it was something. 6 weeks after the wedding, Clara hosted her first dinner party. 12 guests, carefully chosen. Lady Catherine and her current companion, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, Thomas, and a young woman he was courting. 3 couples from Rowan's business circles. And in a move that shocked everyone, Lord and Lady Ashford, The same couple whose ball had started everything. Lady Ashford arrived looking nervous, Lord Ashford pompous as ever. They'd accepted the invitation out of obligation. You didn't refuse a duchess's invitation without good reason, but clearly expected to be bored at best, scandalized at worst. Instead, they found intelligent conversation, excellent food, and a hostess who could hold her own in political debate without once appearing to try too hard. Clara had learned her lessons well. Watch, listen, adapt. By the end of the evening, Lady Ashford was laughing at something Lady Catherine said, and Lord Ashford was deep in conversation with Rowan about coal mine safety regulations. As guests departed, Lady Ashford took Clara's hand. "Thank you for inviting us," she said. "I'll admit we weren't sure what to expect." "And?" Clara kept her voice neutral. "And I think we've been unfair. You're not what we expected." She hesitated. "What I expected. I'm sorry for that." It wasn't a full apology. Wasn't acknowledgement of everything they'd done, all the ways they'd participated in Clara's ostracism. But it was something. A crack in the wall. After they left, Clara found Rowan on the terrace, looking out over the dark garden. "That went well?" he said without turning around. "It did." Clara moved to stand beside him. Lady Ashford apologized. Sort of. "They'll tell everyone the dinner was acceptable. By next week, 10 more families will be willing to acknowledge you." He glanced at her. "You're doing it, Clara. You're changing their minds." "Some of them, maybe. Not all." "Not all," he agreed. "But enough. That's all we need. Enough people that the others start to look petty and cruel instead of righteous." Clara leaned against the railing, feeling the cold stone beneath her hands. 8 weeks ago, she'd been invisible, dismissed, certain she'd never matter to anyone. Now she was hosting dinners and planning charity events and slowly, painfully, building a life that was hers. It wasn't what she'd imagined, wasn't easy or simple or free from pain, but it was real. "Thank you," she said quietly. Rowan turned to face her fully. "For what?" "For seeing me. For refusing to let me stay invisible." Clara met his eyes. "For believing I could do this when I didn't believe it myself." His expression softened into something that made her chest ache. "You never needed me to believe in you, Clara. You just needed permission to believe in yourself." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. That last wall she'd been holding on to crumbling away. She'd been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she hadn't let herself feel this, hadn't let herself want it, but she wanted it now. Wanted him. Wanted this life they were building, wanted the future they were fighting for. When they broke apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to be all right," he said, "both of us. Together." Clara believed him. 2 days later, an invitation arrived that changed everything. Clara was in the morning room reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Davies when Henderson brought in the mail on a silver tray. Most of it was standard: thank you notes from dinner guests, invitations to minor events, correspondence from Lady Catherine. But one envelope was different. Heavier paper, royal seal. Clara's hand shook as she broke it open. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackthorn, is cordially invited to attend Her Majesty Queen Charlotte at Carlton House for afternoon tea. Please respond at your earliest convenience." Clara read it 3 times before the words sank in. The Queen. The actual Queen wanted to meet her. Mrs. Davies saw her face and moved closer. "Your Grace, is something wrong?" "I'm invited to Carlton House. For tea. With the Queen." Mrs. Davies's face split into a brilliant smile. "Your Grace, that's wonderful. An audience with Her Majesty. Do you know what that means?" Clara did. It meant royal acknowledgement. It meant that the highest authority in the land had decided Clara was worth recognizing. Whatever society thought, whatever gossip they spread, they couldn't argue with a direct invitation from Queen Charlotte herself. She found Rowan in the library. He was reading some business report, but looked up when she entered. "What's wrong? You look pale." Clara handed him the invitation without speaking. She watched his eyes scan the page, watched his expression shift from confusion to shock to something fierce and triumphant. "She invited you," he said slowly. "The Queen invited you to tea." "Is this real? Could this be some kind of mistake?" There are no mistakes with royal invitations. He stood, crossed to her, gripped her shoulders. Clara, do you understand what this means? This is it. This is the moment everything changes. If the Queen receives you, if she publicly acknowledges you, no one in London will dare cut you again. But why? Why would she? Because Charlotte doesn't forget what it's like to be an outsider. She came from a minor German duchy, barely spoke English when she married the king. Society tried to keep her in a box too. His smile was wide and genuine, and because Lady Catherine is her goddaughter and probably suggested it. Either way, it doesn't matter. The invitation is real, and you're going to accept it. Clara nodded, feeling like she'd been swept up in a current too strong to fight. What do I wear? What do I say? How do I? We'll figure it out. Together. He pulled her close. You've already done the hard part, Clara. You've survived. Everything else is just details. The week before the tea crawled by like years, Clara rehearsed curtsies until her legs ached, learned proper forms of address, had 3 new gowns made because apparently everything she owned was inappropriate for royalty. Lady Catherine visited twice, coaching her on conversation topics and subtle rules of court etiquette. Don't mention your family unless she brings it up, Lady Catherine advised. And if she does, be honest but brief. Charlotte respects directness. The day itself dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed in cream silk with the blackthorn diamonds at her throat, her hair styled in elaborate loops that took Mary an hour to perfect. She looked like a duchess, felt like a fraud. Rowan walked her to the carriage, his face serious. You're going to be magnificent, he said. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because you always are, even when you don't believe it. He kissed her forehead. Go charm a queen, Clara. Show her what I already know, that you're the strongest person in London. The ride to Carlton House felt both endless and too short. When the carriage stopped, Clara's palms were sweating despite the cold. A footman handed her out, and then she was climbing marble steps into rooms so ornate they made Blackthorn House look modest. Queen Charlotte received her in a private sitting room, smaller than Clara expected, more intimate. The Queen herself was 68, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed simply for someone of her station. Your Majesty. Clara curtsied deep, holding the position while her heart hammered. Rise, child. Let me look at you. Clara straightened. The Queen studied her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. You're younger than I expected, Charlotte said. Her accent was still faintly German after 50 years in England. And you look terrified. I am terrified, Your Majesty. Good. Anyone who isn't frightened of queens is either a fool or lying. Charlotte gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me why you married Blackthorn. Clara sat carefully, mind racing. Be honest, Lady Catherine had said. Because he asked me to, and because I was tired of being invisible. Your family disowned you. Yes, Your Majesty. That must hurt. Every day. The admission slipped out before Clara could stop it. But it would have hurt more to keep living the way I was, pretending I didn't exist, letting them treat me like something to be managed instead of someone with thoughts and feelings and worth. Charlotte's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I was 17 when I married George, barely spoke English. The English court hated me. I was too foreign, too awkward, too German. They wanted someone sophisticated, someone who already knew how to be queen. She poured tea with steady hands. I learned, became what they needed, but it took 20 years before they stopped looking at me like I was an interloper. Clara's throat tightened. How did you survive it? By refusing to apologize for existing, by finding allies instead of begging for acceptance from enemies. Charlotte handed her a cup. Catherine tells me you've done well. Made your own circle, fought your own battles. I've tried, Your Majesty. You've succeeded. Do you know how I know? She leaned forward slightly. Because you're here. Because I invited you, and every woman in London is currently having fits of jealousy. You have something they want now, my attention. That changes the game entirely. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Thank you, Your Majesty. Don't thank me yet. I'm not doing this out of kindness. Charlotte's smile was slight but genuine. I'm doing it because I'm tired of watching strong women be torn apart by weak ones who are afraid of them. And because your husband's mother was my friend, and she would have liked you. They talked for an hour about nothing consequential, books, gardens, the weather. But the content didn't matter. What mattered was that Clara was there, that she'd been invited, that when she left, everyone would know the Queen had received her. As Clara prepared to leave, Charlotte spoke once more. "Your father is a fool," she said simply. "But you already knew that. What you need to know is this. You don't need his forgiveness or acknowledgement. You're a duchess now. You outrank him. Remember that." Clara curtsied again, deeper this time, feeling the weight of what had just happened settling into her bones. She was real now, undeniably, publicly, officially real. The news spread through London like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew that the Duchess of Blackthorn had taken tea with Queen Charlotte. By the next morning, invitations flooded Blackthorn House. Everyone who'd cut them now desperate to repair bridges, to be seen supporting the Duchess who'd won royal favor. Clara sat in her morning room, surrounded by invitations, and laughed until she cried. Rowan found her there, picked up one of the cards from Lady Pemberton, the same woman who'd been so quick to write Clara off weeks ago, and grinned. "What do you want to do with these?" Clara looked at the pile, at all these people who'd dismissed her, mocked her, treated her like she didn't deserve to breathe the same air. "Accept half," she said. "Decline half. Make them work for it." His smile was fierce and proud. "That's my Duchess." And for the first time since she'd said yes to his proposal under that oak tree, Clara felt like it might actually be true. She was his Duchess. And she was going to make them all remember it. She was his Duchess, and she was going to make them all remember it. The season's most anticipated ball was only 3 weeks away, the Hartley Annual Gala, hosted by Vivian's parents at their Mayfair estate. It was the event that determined social standing for the coming year, where alliances were forged and reputations cemented. Invitations were coveted, refusals noted and punished. Clara's invitation arrived 2 days after her tea with the Queen, delivered by special messenger as if to emphasize its importance. Lady Hartley had written a personal note across the top. "We would be honored by your Grace's attendance." The same woman who'd all but called Clara a scheming seductress in the newspapers now wanted her at the centerpiece event of the season. Clara showed the invitation to Rowan over breakfast. He read it, set it down, and started laughing. "They're terrified of you now," he said. "They're terrified of the Queen." "Same thing. You have her favor, which means crossing you means risking royal displeasure." He picked up his coffee. "Are you going?" Clara thought about it. She could decline, make them sweat, prove she didn't need their acceptance. But that felt like retreat, like she was still letting them dictate her choices, just in reverse. "Yes," she said, "but on my terms." Which means, "I'm bringing guests. People they have to accept because refusing would be unthinkable." She smiled. "Lady Catherine, obviously, and I think it's time London met some of the workers from your factories. The ones you've been telling me about, the veterans who lost limbs at Waterloo and now run your production lines." Rowan's expression shifted to something between surprise and admiration. "You want to bring working men to the Hartley Ball?" "I want to bring heroes. Men who sacrificed for England and are now being forgotten by the same society that sent them to war." She met his eyes. "The Queen is patron of the Veterans' Charity. If I bring them as my personal guests, celebrating their service, what can the Hartleys say?" "Nothing, without sounding like they don't support soldiers," he grinned. "Clara, that's brilliant, and absolutely going to cause chaos." "Good. I'm tired of playing defense." Over the next 3 weeks, Clara planned her assault with military precision. She met with 5 veterans from Rowan's factories, good men who'd lost legs or arms or eyes but had kept their dignity and humor. She commissioned formal wear for each of them, paid for by the Duchess herself, and arranged for transportation. She coordinated with Lady Catherine, who was delighted by the scheme and offered to bring several of her more radical friends, women who openly supported labor reforms and workers' rights. The newspapers caught wind of it and went wild. Some praised the Duchess's charity and patriotism. Others called it a publicity stunt, a desperate attempt to buy goodwill. A few suggested she was turning the Hartley Ball into a political statement. They were right. She was. The morning of the ball, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Henderson announced Lady Margaret Whitford, and for a moment Clara couldn't process the words. Her mother was here. Clara stood frozen in the morning room, her heart doing something painful. She hadn't seen her mother in 3 months, not since she'd walked out of her father's house and into this new life. Part of her wanted to refuse the visit, to send her mother away the way she'd been sent away. But a larger part, the part that still remembered being a child who'd loved her mother desperately, couldn't do it. "Show her in," Clara said. Lady Margaret entered looking older than Clara remembered. Her face was drawn, her clothes expensive but not fashionable, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her reticule. She stopped just inside the door, as if afraid to come closer. "Clara," she said, just that. Just her name. "Mother." Clara kept her voice neutral. "This is unexpected. I know I have no right to be here. Your father would be furious if he knew." Margaret twisted the reticule in her hands. "But I had to see you. Had to know you were all right. I'm fine. You're a duchess. You had tea with the Queen." Margaret's smile was watery. "I heard about tonight, about the soldiers you're bringing. It's very kind of you." "It's strategic," Clara corrected. "I'm making a point." "Yes, I suppose you are." Margaret moved closer, her eyes searching Clara's face. "You look different, older, harder, maybe." "I've had to be." Silence fell between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. For everything. For not defending you, for letting your father. For all of it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You were my daughter, my child, and I let them treat you like you were broken, like you were something to be ashamed of. I'll never forgive myself for that." Clara felt her own eyes burning, but refused to let the tears fall. "Why didn't you stand up for me? Even once? Why didn't you tell them to stop?" "Because I was afraid." The admission came out raw. "Afraid of your father, afraid of society, afraid of what it would mean if I admitted that maybe they were all wrong and we'd failed you. It was easier to go along, to pretend we were protecting you when really we were just protecting ourselves from embarrassment." "I needed you." Clara's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I needed my mother, and you chose him over me." "I know, and I have to live with that." Margaret stepped closer. "But I'm here now. I know it's too late. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm proud of you, so incredibly proud. You've done what I never had the courage to do. You refused to be invisible." Clara wanted to stay angry. Anger was easier than this complicated mess of hurt and longing and the desperate desire for her mother's approval even after everything. But looking at Margaret's face, at the genuine remorse there, the grief, she felt something soften inside her. "I can't forgive you yet," she said quietly. "Maybe not ever. But I appreciate you coming." "That's more than I deserve." Margaret wiped her eyes. "Your father won't change his mind. He's too stubborn, too proud. But I wanted you to know that I see you. I see what you've become, and it's magnificent." She left before Clara could respond, slipping out as quietly as she'd arrived. Clara stood alone in the morning room, feeling like she'd been cracked open and put back together wrong. Rowan found her an hour later, still standing in the same spot. "Mrs. Davies said your mother was here." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "What did she want?" "To apologize. To tell me she was proud." Clara turned to face him. "I don't know if I believe her." "Does it matter?" "Yes. No, I don't know." She pressed her hands to her face. "I spent so long wanting her approval, and now that she's offering something like it, I don't know what to do with it." Rowan crossed to her, pulled her hands away from her face. "You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to forgive her or accept her apology or let her back into your life. You get to decide what happens next. Not her, not your father, you." Clara looked at him, this man who'd given her choices when everyone else had tried to make them for her. "I want to survive tonight. After that, I'll figure out the rest." "Then let's go survive." The Hartley estate blazed with light when they arrived. Carriages lined the drive, disgorging guests in elaborate finery. Clara wore deep crimson, bold, impossible to ignore, with the blackthorn diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. Rowan wore black as always, a deliberate contrast that made them look like a matched set of weapons. Behind them came Lady Catherine in purple silk, looking regal and amused. And behind her, 5 veterans in formal wear that couldn't quite hide their injuries but somehow made them look more impressive rather than less. They entered together, a deliberate formation. The butler announced them, their graces the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, and the ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned to them. Clara saw Lady Hartley go pale, saw Vivian's mouth fall open, saw 100 faces cycling through shock and calculation as they noticed the men behind Clara and tried to figure out what it meant. "Smile," Rowan murmured. "You're winning." Clara smiled. Lady Hartley recovered first, rushing forward with false warmth. "Your Grace, how wonderful that you could attend. We're so honored." "These are my guests," Clara interrupted smoothly, gesturing to the veterans. "Captain James Morrison, Lieutenant Peter Webb, Sergeant Thomas Crawford, Corporal Henry Walsh, and Private David Bennett. They served with distinction at Waterloo and now work in the Blackthorn factories. I thought it appropriate to celebrate their service at tonight's festivities." Lady Hartley's smile froze. She couldn't refuse them, not without insulting war heroes in front of half of London, but accepting them meant acknowledging working-class men as equals at her exclusive ball. "Of course," she said finally, the words coming out strangled. "How patriotic of you, Your Grace." The veterans bowed, their military training evident in the precision of the gesture. Lady Hartley fled as soon as politeness allowed, and Clara heard her hiss something to Lord Hartley across the room. "That was cruel," Lady Catherine said approvingly. "I'm so proud." The ball proceeded, but the atmosphere was electric with tension. People couldn't decide whether to be outraged or impressed. Some of the older military men gravitated toward the veterans, exchanging war stories. A few of the younger ladies looked scandalized but intrigued, and Clara stood at the center of it all, watching her carefully placed disruption spread through the room like ripples in a pond. Then Vivian appeared, her face tight with fury. "You've made a mockery of this ball," she said, her voice low and vicious. "Bringing those men here like it's some kind of political rally. This is supposed to be civilized." "Civilized?" Clara kept her voice even. "Like the way you and your mother spread lies about me in the papers? Like the way you tried to humiliate me at every opportunity? That kind of civilized?" "I was protecting society from someone who doesn't belong." "No. You were punishing me for existing, for daring to marry a man you wanted, for not staying in the corner where you decided I belonged." Clara stepped closer. "But here's what you never understood, Vivian. I was never competing with you. I didn't want your life, or your friends, or your approval. I just wanted to be seen as a person. And the fact that terrified you so much says everything about you and nothing about me." Vivian's face contorted. "You think you've won? You think one invitation from the Queen changes everything? They still laugh at you behind your back. They still think you trapped Blackthorn, that you're playing at being a duchess. Let them think whatever they want." Clara's voice was steel. "I'm not playing. I am the Duchess of Blackthorn. I have resources, influence, and I'm just getting started. So you can spend your energy trying to tear me down, or you can accept that I'm not going anywhere and maybe focus on building something of your own. Your choice." She walked away before Vivian could respond, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. Around them, people had stopped even pretending not to stare. Rowan appeared at her elbow. "Feel better?" "Immensely." The musicians struck up a waltz. Couples began moving to the floor. Clara watched them, feeling that old familiar exclusion, the knowledge that she couldn't participate, couldn't hear the music, couldn't be part of that particular dance. Then Rowan held out his hand. "May I?" Clara looked at him, remembering their first dance at the Ashford ball. Remembering how terrified she'd been, how certain it would be a disaster. "I still can't hear the music," she said. "Then we'll make our own again." His smile was gentle. "Dance with me, Clara. Show them we don't need their approval to be happy." She took his hand, they moved onto the floor, and just like that first time, he guided her through steps only they understood. His hand at her waist, firm and sure, his eyes holding hers, never looking away. They weren't following the waltz. They were creating something entirely new, something that belonged only to them. And slowly, other couples stopped dancing to watch. It should have been humiliating, should have felt like being on display, like a curiosity being examined. But Clara didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see that she was happy, that she'd found something real in the middle of all their artifice and performance. When the music, whatever it had been, ended, the ballroom erupted in applause. Not scattered, polite clapping, but genuine applause that rolled through the room like thunder. Clara looked around, startled. She saw Lady Catherine beaming, saw the veterans grinning, saw even some of the people who'd been cruel to her wearing expressions of grudging respect. And there, in the corner, she saw her mother. Margaret must have arrived late, must have been standing there watching. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Margaret raised her hand to her heart, a gesture that said everything her words hadn't been able to. Clara felt her throat tighten, but nodded once. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. A possibility of something rebuilding from the ashes. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and carefully calculated social moves. Several families who'd cut Clara entirely now approached to make amends. She was gracious but measured, accepting some overtures and coolly dismissing others. By the time they left, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted. The Duchess of Blackthorn was no longer a scandal. She was a force. In the carriage ride home, Clara leaned against Rowan's shoulder, exhausted but satisfied. "Did we win?" she asked. "You won. I just stood there looking intimidating." "We won," she corrected. "Together." He kissed the top of her head. Together. The next few months transformed Clara's life in ways she couldn't have imagined. The veterans she'd brought to the ball became the foundation of a new initiative, workshops providing skills training for wounded soldiers, funded by the Duchess and supported by several prominent families who'd been shamed into helping. Lady Catherine joined as co-patron, lending her influence to the cause. The Queen invited Clara to Carlton House twice more, each visit further cementing her position. By the end of the season, Clara was hosting her own salons, gatherings that mixed aristocrats with artists, soldiers with scholars, creating exactly the kind of unconventional circle she'd always needed. Her father never contacted her, never acknowledged her existence beyond removing her from the family Bible and having her portrait taken down from the gallery. Clara told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need his approval. Most days, she even believed it. But her mother sent letters. Not often. Once a month, maybe. Brief notes about nothing important, but signed with love every time. Clara kept them in a drawer, unread at first, then slowly, carefully, began to respond. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. Thomas visited regularly, bringing his new fiancée, the pretty blonde from the Ashford ball, now head over heels for Clara's brother. They married in spring, and Clara stood as witness, the first time she'd been in the same room as her father since her wedding. Sir Henry looked old, diminished somehow, like refusing to acknowledge Clara had cost him something essential. He didn't speak to her, didn't even look in her direction. But Thomas said later that he'd watched Clara during the entire ceremony, his expression unreadable. He regrets it, Thomas said. He won't admit it, but he does. Clara didn't know if that made it better or worse. A year after her wedding, on a cold December afternoon, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Rowan in his study, watching his face cycle through shock and joy, and something that looked like terror. Are you all right? He stammered. Clara laughed at his incoherence. I'm fine, terrified, but fine. A baby. He said it like he couldn't quite believe it. We're having a baby. Eventually, yes. In about 7 months, according to the doctor. Rowan pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I'm going to be terrible at this. Probably, so will I. Clara held him tight. But we'll figure it out together, like everything else. The pregnancy was harder than she expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made even standing feel impossible. Clara, who'd spent a year building her independence and power, suddenly found herself weak and vulnerable again. It terrified her. What if I can't do this? She asked Rowan one night, lying in bed with his hand on her growing stomach. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if the baby is deaf like me, and I can't protect them from everything I went through? Then we'll handle it, Rowan said firmly. And if our child is deaf, they'll grow up knowing they're perfect exactly as they are, because they'll have a mother who understands, who can teach them how to be strong. That's more than most children get. Clara wanted to believe him. Some days it was easier than others. The baby came in July after 18 hours of labor that left Clara wrung out and shaking. But when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, Clara felt something slot into place inside her chest. A daughter. Small and red and absolutely furious about being born. "She's perfect," Rowan breathed, his finger tracing the baby's impossibly tiny hand. "She's screaming," Clara observed. "Still perfect." They named her Charlotte after the queen who'd given Clara her first real acknowledgement. Queen Charlotte herself sent an elaborate christening gown and a note that said simply, "Welcome to the world, little fighter." Clara's mother asked to visit. Clara said yes, surprising herself. Margaret arrived looking nervous and hopeful, bearing a carefully wrapped package. "I made this," she said, handing it to Clara. "When you were born, I was going to give it to you for your first child, but then, well, I kept it anyway." Inside was a christening gown, yellowed slightly with age but still beautiful, hand-embroidered with tiny flowers and birds. Clara traced the stitches, imagining her mother bent over the fabric 24 years ago, full of hope for the daughter she was about to have, before the daughter turned out to be inconvenient. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. Margaret looked at Charlotte, tears streaming down her face. "May I hold her?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. Margaret took the baby with practiced ease, cradling her gently. "She looks like you did," Margaret whispered. Same eyes, same expression, like she's already planning something. She looked up at Clara. "I failed you. I can't change that. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try not to fail her." Clara felt something break open in her chest. Not forgiveness, not completely, but maybe the beginning of it. Maybe enough. "One day at a time," she said. Margaret nodded, not taking her eyes off the baby. One day at a time. The christening was held at St. George's, attended by half of London. Lady Catherine stood as godmother, Thomas as godfather. The Queen herself sent a representative, making clear her continued favor. Clara stood at the front of the church, holding her daughter, surrounded by the family she'd built from scratch. Rowan, Thomas, Lady Catherine, the veterans who'd become friends, the circle of artists and scholars and rebels who filled her salons. And at the back of the church, having arrived late and clearly uncertain of their welcome, stood her parents. Her father looked older, smaller somehow. Her mother stood beside him, one hand on his arm, her expression pleading. They'd come. After 18 months of silence, they'd come. Clara looked at Rowan. He squeezed her hand, leaving the choice to her. She could turn away, could pretend she didn't see them, could make them feel the same exclusion they'd made her feel. Or she could be bigger than that. Clara walked down the aisle, Charlotte in her arms. She stopped in front of her parents, watching her father's face work through emotions she couldn't name. "Would you like to meet your granddaughter?" she asked quietly. Her father's face crumpled. "Clara, Not here. Not now." She kept her voice level. "But maybe. Eventually, if you're willing to actually try." "I am." The words came out broken. "I'm so sorry for everything. You were right, and I was a fool. A proud, stubborn fool who threw away his daughter because I couldn't admit I was wrong." Clara felt tears burning, but refused to let them fall. "You hurt me, badly, and I'm not going to pretend that's fine just because you've changed your mind. I know, I don't expect forgiveness. He looked at Charlotte, his expression softening. "I just want the chance to know her, to be better for her than I was for you." Clara looked at the baby in her arms, at her daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, loved exactly as she was. Then she looked at her father, this man who'd been her first heartbreak, her earliest lesson in not being enough. "Her name is Charlotte," Clara said. "Charlotte Margaret Blackthorne." Her mother gasped softly at hearing her own name included. Her father's eyes filled with tears. "One day at a time," Clara said, echoing her mother's earlier words. "You don't get to waltz back in and pretend nothing happened. But if you're genuinely willing to change, if you can see me as I am instead of what you wanted me to be, then maybe we can build something new." "Anything," her father said hoarsely. "Whatever you need, whatever you're willing to give, I'll take it." It wasn't reconciliation, Wasn't the fairy tale ending where everything was magically fixed, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall, a possibility. Sometimes that was enough. The christening reception was held at Blackthorn House, the gardens full of guests and laughter and life. Clara moved through the crowd, Charlotte in her arms, accepting congratulations and well wishes. She saw Lady Hartley arrive, looking uncomfortable but trying. Saw Vivian standing near the refreshments, alone for once, watching Clara with an expression that wasn't quite envy and wasn't quite respect, but was something close to both. Clara could have ignored her, could have let old grudges fester, but she was tired of fighting, tired of proving herself. She'd won. She'd built a life worth living. What else was there? She walked over, Charlotte nestled against her shoulder. Lady Vivienne. Vivienne turned, clearly expecting confrontation. Your Grace, congratulations on your daughter. Thank you. Clara paused, then added, I'm hosting a charity gala next month, fundraising for the Veterans Workshops. You should come. Vivienne blinked, clearly thrown. Why would you invite me? Because holding grudges is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy. Clara shifted Charlotte slightly. You don't have to like me, but maybe we can manage civil, for the sake of the causes that matter more than our personal drama. Vivienne studied her for a long moment. You really have changed everything, haven't you? I tried to survive. Everything else just happened around that. Vivienne stopped, started again. I was cruel to you, unnecessarily cruel. I told myself I was protecting society's standards, but really I was just threatened, Clara finished. I know. I get it now, even though I didn't then. Does that mean you forgive me? Clara considered. It means I'm moving on. Whether you come with me or keep standing in the past is your choice. She walked away before Vivienne could respond, leaving her with the same choice Clara had been given over and over, evolve or be left behind. As the sun set over London, Clara found Rowan on the terrace, watching the celebration. She joined him, Charlotte sleeping peacefully between them. Happy? He asked. Terrified, exhausted, overwhelmed. She leaned her head against his shoulder. But yes, happy. No regrets? Clara thought about everything that had led them here. The dance that started it all, the wedding on the floor, the battles fought and won and lost, the slow, painful rebuilding of a relationship with her parents, the daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted. None, she said firmly. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner. He kissed her temple. But we have time now. All the time in the world. Below them, the party continued. Lady Catherine was holding court near the fountain, surrounded by admirers. Thomas was dancing with his wife, looking happier than Clara had ever seen him. Her parents stood together near the garden wall, watching Clara with expressions of tentative hope. And everywhere, people were mixing, aristocrats and artists, veterans and scholars, the old guard and the new. The circle Clara had built slowly and painfully from the ashes of the life she'd left behind. She'd started out invisible, dismissed, written off as damaged goods by a society that couldn't see past her limitations. Now she was the Duchess of Blackthorn, mother, patron, the woman who'd forced London to acknowledge that strength came in forms they'd never expected. She hadn't just survived, she'd thrived, and in doing so she'd changed the rules for everyone who came after her. Charlotte stirred against her shoulder, making small noises. Clara looked down at her daughter's face, at this tiny person who would grow up in a different world than the one Clara had been born into. Not a perfect world. There would still be prejudice, still be people who couldn't see past differences, but a world where at least one girl had been told from birth that she was enough, that she deserved to take up space, that silence could be a form of power instead of a prison. What are you thinking? Rowan asked. Clara smiled, feeling the weight of everything they'd built together, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the scars. I'm thinking we did it, she said. We actually did it. Did what? Made something real. Made something that matters. She looked at him, at the man who'd seen her when no one else bothered to look. Made a life worth fighting for. Rowan's arms came around both of them, his wife and his daughter, the family he'd chosen and fought to protect. That we did, he said softly. That we did. And as the stars came out over London, Clara stood surrounded by love and laughter and the messy, imperfect reality of the life she'd built, and knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, completely, undeniably home. Not because she'd been accepted, not because she'd been forgiven, but because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that she'd never needed their permission to exist. She was the Duchess of Blackthorn. She was Charlotte's mother. She was Rowan's wife. She was Lady Catherine's friend and Thomas's sister, and a force that had reshaped London society, whether they liked it or not. But most importantly, she was Clara, just Clara, deaf and stubborn and far too brave for her own good. And that, finally, after 24 years of being told she wasn't enough, was more than sufficient. It was everything